Greetings. Good everything, everybody. Episode 249. I was like, woo, wow.
That's a lot.
249. Yes, we
And
have.
a huge archive and just I was back in there looking for Philadelphia Freedom Schools, which we talked about before, but I feel like we haven't done it in one place, and I saw five in the archive that it came out immediately, and I was like, wow. So 53, 109, 134, 138, and 141, but in pieces. So
Can I say, I want to say, yesterday I had a call from a 24-year-old young man. I think his name is Nathaniel.
hmm.
You know, I know there's multi-generations listening. This week we had a woman call and then she put her daughter on the phone who's working on some things. And it's like little kids, sometimes 7, 8-year-olds will be, want to get on and talk to us. And it's a beautiful thing. I think
Yeah,
it's a unique space in that, we may have, grandparents taking care of kids listening and people driving their children from school or to school with you in the mornings, and they're all absorbing this knowledge. But this young man called yesterday on a Foolishness Friday just to tell us, and I had to ask him, how did you find Urban View? Because I don't see a lot of young people just signing up for Sirius XM. And he said, I was listening to In Class with Carr, and Dr. Carr just grabbed my soul. It was like, everything that I learned in school was none of this. And so I followed this man 6 months ago to Urban View, and and then I heard everybody else, and now I'm
wow.
glued to, and it almost made me want to cry, because I'm like,
Mm,
this was not the vision, but I imagine, unlike programming for young people and programming for Black people and programming for white people, how they program for people, and we're all having an experience that's very similar, as you say, myself at different ages. We're having these experiences, and the way we talk to people, we're not, it's not like for young people. We're not programming for old people. We're just talking truth and knowledge, and it's resonating. And that call yesterday made me feel like everything that I thought I was doing here, it actually matters. So I just want to thank him, because I know he's here this morning.
oh
And
man, thank you, Nathaniel. Thank you, Professor Hunter, because that highway, that network, that institution, that constellation is organic. It's a whole group. Thanks to you. I mean, the Sirius has been a revelation because, and you said this before anything, we all get to be in conversation. So folk call up, you never know, and they're talking and listening to you interact, and then I mean across the channel, but just people, regular folk. I mean, and I say regular folk, we're all regular folk, but just you can't predict. And then there are the moments when, because it is Sirius XM, and because you've created that pathway, people who are just regular folk, who also have, because of some skill set they have, or because of the vagaries and the comings and goings of pop culture, want to be on a platform where they can move some. I mean, I never would have imagined being in conversation with Dionne Warwick, and I never would have imagined, I've talked with Mary Frances Berry before, but even Kim Burns is a different conversation. But today, especially on this day, after when we were all together Monday night in office hours, when we got the news about, of course, Nikki Giovanni, the first thing that came to mind when somebody like Michael Vick, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm doing this black quarterback thing, so I want to do it on Sirius. And they said, well, can you come on the morning show? Sure. I'm not asking you about sports. I want to ask you about Nikki Giovanni because you went to Virginia Tech, and I haven't seen any. That's you. In other words, nobody. No, I'm serious. It wouldn't if he hadn't come there.
True, definitely.
Definitely. So I don't think anybody else has asked him about that. I mean, but he was Nikki Giovanni's student.
But they wouldn't know to ask him, because they wouldn't have this is what I'm saying. Like Drew McCaskill said today, some people don't need a mic, they need therapy. But I also feel that you earn the right to have a mic because of your life's work. And it's not condescension or anything. There are people that just know more things than other people. And guess what? That's fixable. You can know more things too. So it's not like a secret club of people that know things. It's people that have committed to knowing things, and you're one of those people. So it's funny. I do original content, a lot of original content for the holidays, because and then we blend in some things that you heard, and I record, like I recorded a whole show with Roderick last week, just so that folk, if they're driving, about their day, they're not hearing repeats and stuff. But I did a whole show of the first. So the first time Clay Kane was on the show, the first time Laurie Daniel Favors was on the show, and the first time Dr. Greg Carr was on the show. And if Adjoa did not bring you up there that day, we wouldn't be sitting here today, which
Absolutely.
I'm saying this on purpose because everybody has a role to play in things, and you don't know what your role is. I'm sure she didn't come there thinking this is going to change people's lives, because it has changed my life. I'm sure she didn't bring you up there saying, oh, I'm about to set the thing in motion.
Nah.
She just said, all right, come on with me. And you didn't even know what you were coming into. And neither did I. No. And now here we are almost 5 years later.
Isn't that something? You're right. We all play that. We all play that role, and we all have a role to play. And it doesn't always, in fact, it probably rarely reveals itself in the moment. We think it's one thing, and it's quite another thing. It's so funny. I was reading an interview that Nikki Giovanni gave with a sister who's down at James Madison University. And this was about 4 years ago. And they had done this whole convening around the life and work of Nikki Giovanni. And, she was always very humble. And then, listening to you and being in conversation with her, you see no filter, which is a beautiful thing. Never had a filter. I mean, she had a filter when she was a teenager, much less, So, but she said in the interview, she said, people ask me about fame and things like that. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm just a person. I'll be on the plane. I get off the plane. Somebody say, can I take a selfie? And I say, I got to pee, but I'm going to stop and take the selfie, even though the pee getting ready to run down my leg. I don't care, because I'm in this conversation. And then she talked about the burden of fame. And she said, you can only please yourself. And anytime you start worrying about what other people say, and then she starts talking about Whitney Houston and her partner. And she said, I worked with her mom. And of course, in 1971, when Nikki Giovanni, that album she recorded, Truth Is on the Way, with the New York Community Choir. I mean, she's worked with, she said, but, I can't tell anybody else how to raise their child. But I think she was wrong. She was wrong. She should have let her have Robin, because then she went to crack and Bobby, and no, you shouldn't have put your thing. And then she said Gladys Knight. I don't mind saying it. I don't like Gladys Knight. They asked Gladys Knight. Gladys Knight said she's crazy. She was talking. Now I don't know Gladys Knight. I don't know. I don't have any relationship. But she brought it to this point. She said they asked her that question. He said, oh, it's difficult, the burden of fame. She said, no, you be yourself. If you ask for that, why would you think it's a burden when you get it? I understand, but you should not be worried about what other people think. And I think about that in the context of people playing their roles. And she's saying, no, you be who you are in the world, and however it works out, works out. She said, but she did say this finally. She said near the end of the interview, but there's always a price to pay. Nothing in life comes for free, and rarely is it cheap. So if you freedom isn't free, there it is. It isn't free. It's gonna cost you something. And she said, and it's usually gonna cost you something pretty steep. So it was just fascinating.
I mean, but doesn't everything, living an unfulfilled life cost you? Living a life in the shadows costs you. Living a small life costs life is, as I say, it rains on everyone. You're going to have experiences. We all in New Jersey saw drones fly over our house. We all had that experience. I don't know what it means. I don't know what they drop in, but we all had the experience. Some people were very nervous about it. I was like, there's nothing I can do. Whatever they do, I'm going to go on and keep pushing. Some folk went to the Ring app and was like, there's another drone. I was like, I'm not going to be bothered, because I don't know how it got up there, and I can't shoot it down. So you know what? How to handle it is really the measure of a person.
How about that?
Kwame Alexander over here. Kwame Alexander. I did not know you brought up Michael Vick. So I interview these people in disparate ways, and I don't know anybody. So I'm curious. So I bring them on because I'm just curious. I want to know. Sell me your book. Make me want to buy it. And we, Kwame and I became very, I learned about his dad, and, he's a beautiful person. And then he brings up Nikki Giovanni one interview. And I'm like,
absolutely.
And she's roundly responsible for this man, not just his dad,
Yeah,
becoming who he is. And it's like, you don't know what impact you're going to have. So you have to show up
that's right.
for people and for yourself. You have
That's
to show up. Like sure she taught everyone the way I teach everybody. I'm just not, I'm not
yeah.
handpicking. Somebody praised my staff, and I'm like, everybody but Smith and Jameson came out of my classroom, and there are about 12 Sirius XM employees that work on different channels, produce different shows in different departments that came from my classroom. And my only thing was, the first person who fills out the form and applies gets the job. I was agnostic. I didn't handpick my students, but the people that signed up happened to be the ones that wanted it, right? To this day, Stephanie was the first. She's still there. Executive producer, and bought her home. She done got her car. I'm so proud. And I don't know why she took the class, because she was sitting in the cut, quiet. I ain't even reckon, when she filled out the thing, I was like, you did this? I was like, all these other kids were,
Because I was listening.
it was her. It was her. So, it's just a beautiful thing for us to be in community with folk. And whether it's, your children or your grandchildren, whatever, you can have an impact on people that can change the world. I'm looking at Kwame's book, and I keep it over my shoulder because it's really good, by the way.
Yes. Door no returns, no
Yeah.
joke.
But, that's Nikki Giovanni's seed.
How about that?
Yeah.
And every generation has to do what it has to do. I mean, we were blessed, at least, because when people make transition, you never know. But the Nubians came and let us know on Monday night, and so we were able to ring the bell, along with elevating several other people who are part of our family, which is very, very important for us to do. And in that conversation, then the news just begins to circulate, of course, as folks became aware. And so a lot of things, as always transpires in the week between our conversations, started cooking in our minds, certainly in my mind. And of course, one of the clips that made wide circulation was a conversation between a young Nikki Giovanni, 28 years old, and James Baldwin. And this is something that I thought at the moment, when I started seeing it everywhere, for people who have watched it a million times or have seen it for the first time, that this will be perhaps the point of entry for today. Because each generation, the famous quote, Frantz Fanon, each generation out of relative obscurity must identify its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. He's talking collectively. He's talking in a collective sense. And by the way, Fanon, of course, the Algerian Revolution, that period in the 1950s and 60s, Algeria throwing off imperialism in France. News from Burkina Faso this week that Traore, the leader there of the coup, and who is now replaced another government in Burkina Faso, but between Burkina Faso and Mali, and then Senegal making noise like we don't really want France here. All of that context of collective action becomes important, not individuals, but collective action. And I want to pause here and put a footnote in. As I said, we said this on Sirius, and I said it Monday night in office hours after having spent Sunday afternoon with Paul Coates and several Nubians and a group that filled up the theater at AFI Theater. I just wanted to mention that the film Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, which will be released for purchase in January, at which point we'll do a Nubia and refill on it, really traces how individuals don't beat institutions, and that individuals who represent communities and who are in community can change an entire world, and how individuals who are determined to stop those people will come together and stop at nothing if they have no morals. Shout out to the Dulles brothers, John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. Shout out to Dwight David Eisenhower, trash president of the United States. Shout out to all the CIA agents that conspired and colluded with the Belgians to murder Patrice Lumumba and stick in his former friend, Mobutu Sese Seko, then known as Joseph Mobutu. But I'm raising that film. I'm coming out of the footnote in a moment. Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, because it also shows Dizzy Gillespie and Nina Simone and Malcolm X and Abby Lincoln and Maya Angelou and Rosa Guy and so many other people of African descent, cultural meaning makers who come together, who literally rush the United Nations, bust up in the middle of the meetings, start throwing hands. Louis Michaud, Mr. Michaud, who owned the bookstore on 125th Street, where you see Malcolm often, Fidel Castro, uh, leaders of other places. You see Gamal Nasser out of Egypt, what is now known as Egypt, Kwame Nkrumah out of Ghana. You see what happens when people who are in community with each other and represent broader communities, Nehru out of India. You see people coming together. The Bandung Conference in 1955, even Louis Armstrong and Louise Armstrong making commentary. You see people coming together say, no, this must stop. And that's how you change your world. Individuals don't beat institutions, but individuals are important. And Nikki Giovanni is a very important figure in that. But even as Frantz Fanon said, that each generation has identified its mission, you have to link the generations. And so she was asked about 3 or 4 years ago, what it means to be in community and what each generation must do. And she had a very interesting quote, and I wish I could find it quickly, but I'm not gonna be able to pull it up. But she said this. She said, you confront the thing in front of you. I'm paraphrasing. She said, my generation faced segregation and we beat it because we could see it. He says, but we couldn't defeat racism. That's for your generation. So she says, stop complaining about what the previous generation didn't do, and you take on what your generation must face, because we took on what our generation would face and we beat it because we could. We couldn't beat racism. That's now it's your turn. What a powerful message, because I've been thinking a lot about this in the wake of her transition. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it today, because when we leave here, I'm headed north to Philly, my adopted hometown. There is a convening to celebrate a quarter century of Philadelphia Freedom Schools. And technically it's 26 years. I should know because I was there, February 1999, which I'm going to remind people. But I also understand that this is a beautiful convening to mark that quarter century that we passed last year, and to kind of point toward the future with a bridge. And I'm going to talk about some of that. What is the responsibility? And Nikki Giovanni's passing, Yolanda Cornelia Giovanni Jr., because her mama was Yolanda Cornelia Giovanni Sr. She isn't the first to have a daughter that she named after herself. Ida Wells had Ida B. Wells Jr., which is a very beautiful thing. I love how Black women just decide we're gonna do this, and then like everything else, the world follows in its wake. Sometimes sometimes it doesn't. But the passing, and of course her sister, as we all know, you've heard this many times, of course, called her Nikki for some reason. Never explained. Her sister Gary called her Nikki, and we all call her Nikki. But that conversation that she had with James Baldwin at 28.
Can you just talk? Her sister's name was Gary.
Well,
oh, you muted.
Short, yeah, short for a female name, but yeah, they call her Gary. Yeah, yeah, Nikki, her older sister, yeah. Which is, I mean, and I always have had a special spot, because the people who are from where we came out of our mother's wombs, who have a shorthand, we all have shorthands from places where we were quote unquote from. And although she has a very interesting conversation about 1619, I'm gonna come to in a minute, but Nikki Giovanni, that is. Nikki Giovanni's her mother's people were from Albany, Georgia, and her father's people were from Mobile, Alabama. But her mother and father both went to Knoxville College. Shout out to the HBCU. They just got a new president. Yes, Knoxville College is still alive, and there's a Black woman who was in charge at Knoxville College in Knoxville, Tennessee. And they grew up in the Black part of Knoxville, which was decimated when they ran a highway through there, something she talked about this year. We'll come to that in a moment as well, because Nikki Giovanni, this last year of her physical life, as she has made transition now and begins to journey toward ancestorhood, she said, I still got a lot of anger. And it's very interesting to see how Nikki Giovanni changed and didn't change. She says every day is a gift, and it's a wonderful thing. And I'm always looking forward. She said, I don't really reread what I write. I keep going, but there are consistent themes. And one of them is this anger at how white nationalism, white so-called supremacy, racism has stamped so much on us, but she refused to live a life that bucked to that. But watching her again with James Baldwin and the conversation they had is a reminder that individuals don't beat institutions. And in the case of both of them, quite frankly, they represented institutions. In Baldwin's case, more so than Nikki Giovanni and more so than anybody really of his generation, white institutions, white publishers, white networks, white foundations, and white grant makers, and they supported him for whatever reasons. That was a benefit to all of us. And at the same time, Nikki Giovanni came out of Black institutions. And we're going to talk about that. And when you see them in conversation, these are two people who are talking about relationships among African people. And they don't have to have a complete lifetime of, at that time, she was 28 and he was about 20 years older. But they don't have to have the direct experience because they're part of larger communities which had those experiences. And I'm watching how people are entering the conversation they saw a glimpse of, which is part in itself of a larger institutional conversation. You can't understand that conversation between, well, you can, but you benefit from seeing that conversation in context. That conversation, of course, takes place in London. It takes place in London because Nikki Giovanni, a couple of years earlier, had met a brother who's from here, Washington, D.C., Ellis Hazlip, who was the producer and the host of a show called Soul, WNET television in New York. Perhaps along with Tony Brown's Journal, but I would say perhaps even more so. Well, I'm not going to put him in competition because then I'm thinking about, of course, Bob Law on the radio, but thinking about, of course, the great Gil Noble on television. There's so many Black programs, Black Journal. Soul was the television show that Hazlip was responsible for creating. These conversations that were had there haven't been duplicated. And there's a reason for that. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. But when you see Nikki Giovanni there in conversation with James Baldwin, that is not the only conversation she had with people like that on that show. She talked to Muhammad Ali. She was in conversation with all kind of other different people as a young person because she had met Ellis Hazlip and he wanted her to work with him. She had achieved some notoriety because of her early writing. Very interesting life of Nikki Giovanni. And in that conversation, these are two Black people having a conversation about Blackness and relationships. And I'm looking at the comments, and every time we open our mouths, as my mom would say, you put your brain on display. And what I'm seeing is what people don't know. Oh, she was so young, but she schooled him. What are you talking about? Oh, yeah, there's the patriarchy, and she's pushing it back again. And then again, another eruption of what you don't know. Nikki Giovanni was always very clear. She says, I'm not against men, I'm against the patriarchy. And, you know, patriarchy is a funny thing, like racism. Shout out to Clarence Thomas and shout out to, Clarence Thomas has a job. Byron Donalds has a job too, technically, Wesley Hunt and Tim Scott and all those people. So, I mean, but they don't have the jobs they thought they were going to have. Clarence Thomas has the job, but shout out to all those people who can be blackface white supremacists, blackface white nationalists. So you can be female patriarchy as well. I mean, these things kind of bubble over. And so I'm looking at the comments and I'm like, that's okay because it's an opportunity. It's a point of entry. And the thing that really arrested me in the conversation, first to the second, the third, the fifth, 35th, however many times now I've seen it, in context, by the way, you can stream, if you look up Soul with an exclamation point, you can find all of the shows. Those shows have been digitized. They are available. I hate to see one of the places they are available, this place that I've never accessed and probably will die before I access TUBI, I think is what, I don't necessarily want to pronounce it, Tubby Tubi, I don't know. But at any rate, it's so delicious to watch the Murdoch family going through what everybody goes through. The elder or the eldest people make transition or imminent transition, and the siblings already start fighting over, in the case of most people, nothing. In the case of a handful of people, 23 to 35 cents to $1. And in the case of the Murdochs, millions, because they don't want Lacan, the brother, to this week, y'all probably saw the news that the Murdoch family was in court, and I think it was Nevada. The court ruled that the 93-year-old Rupert couldn't go into the irrevocable. Means irrevocable for a reason, son. I know you got $1 million. I know you got $50 million. I know you got $11 billion, but it's an irrevocable trust, and you can't go in it to change, to give everything, control of everything to Lacan and not to James and his two sisters. And so you said at the beginning you want all four of them to split it equally and decide what to do going forward. But now you're nervous that James, the more liberal, quote unquote, of the quartet, apparently, might change Fox News. So you know Lacan is a white nationalist like you for sure. So you want him to be, but the court wouldn't let you do it. Now, so now they're saying, is he going to sell it so that they can't mess it up? So, you know, now, and we also saw this week the new news around Time Warner, which owns, of course, HBO and CNN. Are they going to be broken up? So far, no. But then again, new administration coming up, be easier rules. So this week, of course, said no, but maybe in February they will say, yeah. You never know. But does Elon Musk come in and buy CNN and Fox? Who knows? If Murdoch can, you know, mess up the irrevocable trust and change it, although it was reported in this week's Financial Times that James said, or a spokesperson for James, like, James ain't gonna change Fox. He knows that's where the value is. So your values are here, but your profit value, which is the only value you really have, is there, and you still gonna let these white nationalists spew that propaganda. I get it, but it was always interesting to see that Murdochs have the same problems the rest of us have: succession and fighting. It ain't just people with very little; it's also people with a whole lot materially. Anyway, back into what I was talking about. To see, then, of course, the Murdochs, the reason I brought it up, because Murdoch, I guess, started or owns Tubi. It's free. Ain't nothing free in life. Nikki Giovanni tried to tell you, you're not paying in dollars. You may be paying with your damn mind. But you can stream Soul there and several other places. And you can stream it. And you should watch it. Because, you know, a lot of conversations we have today are repeat conversations without the momentum of memory, which means they are much poorer for not having any memory. I'm saying not having any memory. So in the context of having the conversation, for example, with Minister Farrakhan, Louis Farrakhan comes on Soul. It's the early 1970s. You know, the people in the Nation of Islam, I believe y'all call it the Second Resurrection. Right. This is after, you know, the period when there's turmoil. Talk about succession. Elijah Muhammad's elder, then he makes transition. 75, Ward D. Muhammad goes in another direction. Farrakhan's building up again. He's sitting there on the stage with Ellis Hazlip, surrounded by a studio audience. And everybody was on Earth, Wind and Fire, The Last Poets, Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte, talking about why they're making movies. If you can think of somebody in the late 60s through the mid 70s, they were on Soul. If they were involved in black folk stuff in the United States, Miriam Makeba, even beyond the U.S. But at any rate, Farrakhan's sitting there in front of Ellis Hazlip. They're sitting there face to face. They're in conversation, surrounded by the studio audience of black folk. And in the studio audience, you see the MGT, the Muslim Girls in Training, and the Fruit of Islam, their male counterparts. So they're all in there too. And Ellis Hazlip, who was a black queer man, a gay black man, questions Louis Farrakhan about the Nation of Islam and his personal stance on homosexuality. So people get up now, oh, the patriarchy and Islam and the Nation of Islam, your mouth. Just to be a little quiet now. Get a little momentum of memory. And once you get that little bit of momentum of memory, you may not change what you're about to say, but I think you might change what you're about to say, even if it's only to refine your analysis and critique. If you take a moment to understand that you're not the first to have that conversation, and that only when we have a momentum of memory can we begin to make progress, because each generation has to identify its mission, fulfill it or betray it. But when you link the generations, you can have that much more momentum in problem solving. So all that surrounding this little clip that is making the rounds now on social media, because we're in a destroyed attention span moment of clip, and people watching a little clip from an interview, or maybe even the whole interview, which is a little clip of an entire body of work Nikki Giovanni did in her 20s just on that show, and opining. Oh man, yeah, I think he's right. Some people need therapy. They just talking. I guess we could all use therapy, but the passing of Nikki Giovanni presents us with a responsibility, just like every transition from previous generations presents us with a responsibility. But hers, I think, for this morning, for a few moments, for today, for those who are watching later, presents us with a kind of responsibility to reflect on the meaning of study, reflection, and bearing witness. She was a lifelong student, a lifelong reflector, a lifelong, the other night we were on a Roland show on Thursday night, and Lauren Victoria Burke, the journalist, said, thinking about the world and putting it on paper, something that you've done your whole life, Prof. And interestingly enough, something that Nikki Giovanni did her whole life, and something that Nikki Giovanni's parents, her father, a school teacher, when they moved from Knoxville to Cincinnati. And I'm seeing people talk about the idea that, in that conversation, it's brought up the abuse that Nikki Giovanni witnessed her father do toward her mother. And as an elder, a couple of years ago, Nikki Giovanni is asked about that, and how James Baldwin wanted her to forgive her father. And she said, And then she said later, she said this a couple of years ago, she said, and of course she talked all the time about James Baldwin, but she said, I couldn't make Jimmy change his attitude toward his father and the relationship they didn't have, and how he felt about his father. And so I didn't want him trying to change mine. She said, but now in retrospect, I think about that and I realized that I, didn't have a part in that relationship between my parents, because that's what sent her out of Ohio back to Tennessee to live with her grandparents, her mother's parents, where she gets that grounding. And so it becomes something that when you take something and use it as a kind of cudgel to beat across what you're trying to get across, and we all do that, it becomes disjointed from the larger context. And that is how you can then take people's memories and mash them into your narrative. And if anybody in certainly this criminal enterprise called the United States of America needs to rethink doing that, it's us, because our memories have been used as fodder, as coal in the steam engine, as gasoline in the fuel tank of the criminal enterprise, and to the point where we now begin to say absurd things like, our people built this country. Our people contributed to. What are you doing? Oh, your memory has been eviscerated. You're gasoline now. You're coal. You're fuel to a fire that you didn't start. And now the fuel is taking responsibility for the fire. You've lost your damn mind, but you never had it, because your memories have been excised and used for other narratives. And we all do that in moments, but I would encourage people looking at that interview to look at it in the context and then follow Nikki Giovanni over the arc of her life as she reflects on some of these things. The transition in Nikki Giovanni gives us a responsibility to reflect on the meaning of study, on the meaning of reflection, and on the meaning of bearing witness, because she bore witness her whole life. And this helps us contribute our generations to that ongoing attempt to create better ways of life for us all. At the center of that is literacy. So in a minute, I have to talk about Nikki Giovanni for a little bit longer. I'm going to talk about Freedom Schools just for a moment and tie those things together, because there is a moment, and this is another one that's getting a lot of attention in this interview, where they're talking about responsibility of women toward men and men toward women. And they start talking about honesty in relationships. And James Baldwin says to Nikki Giovanni, I can't lie to you as a Black man. And she says, of course you can. Maybe I want you to lie to me. So you go out and lie to these white people every day. You smile, you grin, you do what you need to do to get from the beginning to the end of the day. Then you come home and take it out on me. Wait a minute. And so James Baldwin was like, yeah. He said, but I'm doing that because I can be myself with you. And I have been duplicitous, or I have been hiding myself all the rest of the time out here in this white world. There is no right or wrong in that, but there is a question that bubble up in my spirit every time I see this. And I'm going to bring it up today. And this is why today our conversation is titled The Perfectibility of Blackness. The idea of complete honesty in relationships between Black people, I'm going to use Black here advisedly for a reason that will become apparent in a moment, raises the question. The question becomes, can that concept of Blackness be perfected? And does that perfection rest in part on an honesty that has no regard for context? What do we mean by honesty? What do we mean by truth? These kind of conversations. Now, when I hear that conversation, I'm listening to Giovanni and Baldwin with the ear of the only thing that I listen to things with, which is that Africana studies lens. Not as an academic practice. We have discarded that, at least in this space. I know people are clinging to it, and you can cling to it. I still go to work at Howard University. It's on the periphery of the work because Africana Studies was never designed to be an academic practice at its core. It is an academic practice in these academic spaces, but ultimately it ties to the same thing Nikki Giovanni was tying to in the Black Power movement, the Black Studies movement, like the Black Power movement, like the Black Arts movement, all come with the idea of Black empowerment. So can Blackness be perfected? And, you know, when we remember from our deep well of African thought and practice, then we raise that question. Can Blackness, which is a concept which was invented as a tool of oppression, can it be recrafted beyond the strategy of resistance to become a space for perfectibility, for social perfectibility, not for individual perfectibility, although individuals make up groups, so there is an individual element of it. But, you know, Blackness was put on us as a label. Can it be perfected? I'm watching Baldwin and Giovanni and Baldwin in conversation, and they're talking about what you have to do outside of those Black spaces. And then when you come in those Black spaces, all the pain that can be revisited and commingled, although in the beautiful poem, Nikki Giovanni, that beautiful line near the end of the poem where she says, Black love is Black wealth. The idea that the love is commingled with hate, that the love is commingled with anxiety and angst and frustration, that the love is commingled with the bitterness, that the love is commingled. So yeah, Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown can be in love one moment, and the next thing is stop fighting yourself. And the next thing you know, they're on a binge. And then we can't turn away watching this because the social structure has crafted a whole blitz of spectacle so that being Bobby Brown becomes a spectator sport. It becomes looking at people, as Ralph Ellison wrote of Charlie Parker, Bird, every night on the bandstand with the heroin flowing through his veins on that horn as the audience watches him literally dismantle, well, not literally, figuratively dismantle himself. Night after night after night after night. All they want is the art. The pain that comes with it becomes spectacle. So much so that some of the people think if they shoot dope, they can sound like Charlie Parker. As Nikki Giovanni makes transition, Haki Mabuti, Sonia Sanchez still walk the earth. As Quincy Jones makes transition, the great Sonny Rollins still walks the physical earth. And that awful day will surely come when we all make transition. But when the passing of somebody like that happens, Nikki Giovanni, who says, you know, it's a damn shame that Bob Dylan got a Pulitzer Prize and Marvin Gaye didn't get it because what's going on is a perfect work of art. But it ain't our prize. And Nikki Giovanni's not mad about that. It's not your prize to give. She said, you know, and they said, well, they got to give it to a dead person. Okay, that's what Maya Angelou said. Well, maybe you'll be on a stamp. She said, you got to be dead to be on a stamp. Okay, well, if you're living, you can get a Pulitzer. You can give that to Bob Dylan. You certainly should give it first to Stevie Wonder. But then it is the Pulitzer Prize, which means it doesn't mean a damn thing. It doesn't mean a damn thing. Except we say that, and then when one of us gets it, we talk about it. It doesn't mean a thing. But you know, but is a conjunction. Conjunction, junction. What's your function? It doesn't mean a thing, but it does mean a thing. Oh, well, damn. I'm bringing all of that up to say that in this context of meaning making, Baldwin and Giovanni in conversation are having a Black conversation about being Black in this larger white nationalist terrorist criminal enterprise, and trying to figure out how much of the honesty that evades the gaze of whiteness they can bring into the space. But the problem I think we face is, can we have that conversation without tapping into not only the intergenerational transmission, the intergenerational exchange of knowledge, values, wisdom? That's what's going on. There's an intergenerational exchange there. There's giving and taking. There's listening and speaking. There's a commingling there, and it's intergenerational. Can we do that in the pursuit of development of character, development of social responsibility, the development of accountability in a way then that empties into collective advance. Because these things become spectacle otherwise. And as Nikki Giovanni many times was asked, they asked her one time, this is about 3 or 4 years ago, they said, you once said that, you said many times that, a poem can't change the world. She said, that's right. A poem can't change the world, but I can change myself. And I can bear witness. I can write, I can speak, I can sing. I have dozens of children's books, dozens of volumes of poetry, the recordings. All of these things, I can bear witness. I can move through the life bearing witness. And if I do that with this genuine concern for humanity, grounded in my own experiences and those of the people who I've been grouped with, then I can help transform the world. But that group is called Black. And the question is, can Black be, if not perfected, can it be a space for perfectibility? Because as the ancient Egyptians would say in Ptah, the limits of one's craft are not reached. You can never be perfect, but can you aspire to perfectibility? Can you be in a space where we can always be getting better? Well, I'm going to pause there and come back to that. I'm pausing in that question, but not leaving it. I'm going to go now into a little bit of Yolanda Cornelia Giovanni Jr., known as Nikki Giovanni. Her life, as I said, her mother's people were from Albany, Georgia. Her grandfather, fascinating figure. He taught. His name was John Brown Watson. John Brown Watson. John Brown Watson taught Latin at Knoxville Austin High School. Now Austin Eats. That they merged, segregated schools, then they merged the schools. And it's very interesting. His grandmother, her grandmother rather, Luvinia, was a social force in the Black community in Knoxville and beyond. She actually visited and learned and exchanged her ideas and thoughts at Highlander Folk School, which is, of course, Mount Eagle, Tennessee. They would hike in the Smoky Mountains. I know this area well, right? Because my father's people from not far from Knoxville, Silver Point, Cookeville, all right, East Tennessee, them Appalachian Africans. You understand? Think about my man, Frank X. Walker, one-time poet laureate of Kentucky, professor at the University of Kentucky, the brother who has written about York so beautifully. They call themselves the Afro-Latian poets, the Africans out of the Appalachians. And of course, they go to Ohio. That's Larry Crow territory. Shout out to my man, Larry Crow. He and Mamo Labisi spent most of this week in Nashville, the hometown, interviewing folks for the History Makers, one of which was the good brother Lou Outlaw, Lucius Turner Outlaw Jr., my man. Beautiful brother, brilliant brother, philosopher by training, professor at Vanderbilt for many years, and a classmate of Nikki Giovanni. So I can imagine the conversations that Larry had with Lou Outlaw this week. Lou Outlaw, who was student body president when Nikki Giovanni returned to Fisk after being put out of Fisk, which we'll talk about in a minute. She did finish at Fisk because her grandfather, John Brown Watson, went to Fisk. So she was going to Fisk. But when he was student body president, Lou Outlaw, he was a classmate of Nikki Giovanni, and Nikki Giovanni and her fellow classmates were pushing the school to get more involved in the civil rights movement. She had helped refound the chapter of SNCC at Fisk. She'd done a lot of work. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But at a key moment, they're pushing Lou, who is the student body president at the time, to do more. You got to do more. Lucius Outlaw out of Mississippi. And Lou was like, man, I think they really against me. But at a key moment, Nikki Giovanni sees him on campus and stops and pecks him on the cheek, gives him a kiss on the cheek and says, "We love you, Lou. We love you." And he said, I was like, man, not only was I glad to hear that really began in earnest a lifelong friendship between Lou Outlaw and Nikki Giovanni. But Larry and Olabisi were in Nashville, and Larry was interviewing folks for the History Makers. And one of the people he interviewed was Lou Outlaw. It just came to mind. But her mother's father went to Fisk, and he loved the stars. So many people are now talking about the documentary Going to Mars, which I think was on HBO Max. And you can see the Nikki Giovanni Project is what it's called. You see her life, and it's a beautiful made documentary. Although I do agree with Roland Martin, who said the other night that, every time you see one of these documentaries, you're glad that there's something rather than nothing, but we need Black resources to make Black documentaries. And I know, Prof, that is one of the things you're absolutely committed to here in Knarrative in Nubia, is making those documentaries. We need to tell our own stories. And because those stories need to be told in a way that are genuinely committed to a different axis. There can't be narrative choices that are made that are not the choices we would make if we weren't worried about somebody else funding it, somebody else. We weren't worried about that. People claim, what's for the audience? We want the broadest reach. No, what you want is the resources. Another thing that makes Nikki Giovanni so beautiful in terms of her representative frankness and candor, she gonna say what she gonna say. And people say, see, if you can say what you're gonna say and be successful, yeah, but your generation faces a different set of circumstances than she faced. Nikki Giovanni came out of a time when there were Black institutions. And some of that plucking of people out of that space is also, I am absolutely convinced, an effort to defuse that collective Black institutional practice. Because remember, not only did her parents go to Knoxville College, not only did her granddaddy go to Fisk, she went to Fisk. She came out of Black institutions. We'll continue talking about that. It's very interesting because they lived on Mulvaney Street. And there was an article in the Knoxville Sentinel this year where they unveiled a marker marking where Nikki Giovanni's home had been. Apparently, the other marker had been knocked down, and some city officials were like, oh, yeah, it was an automobile accident. And she was like, yeah, right. The place she lived isn't there anymore because of what Lamont King, of course, calls real estate violence. Some people call it gentrification. They ran a highway through that Black neighborhood. And the house where her mother's father, her grandfather, Fisk graduate John Brown Watson, used to sit on the porch in evenings after teaching his Latin classes at Knoxville's Austin High School, where he used to sit on the porch as the neighbors would walk by and say, good evening, Prof. Prof, the highest honorific in the Black community. That house isn't there anymore. The house across the street where a minister lived who raised chickens, and the neighborhood where they had parties, the Carnegie Library at the top of the hill there on Mulvaney Street. That's all been displaced. And that is a Major League Baseball stadium there, because as Nikki Giovanni said in another interview I was reading, she said, you know, they put us in a part of town they don't care about, and they want to keep us segregated. We then take that and make it into something of value to us. Again, that early poem, Nikki Rosa, and one of the last poems she writes about Mulberry Street in Knoxville. She says, all the time I was quite happy. I didn't know we were poor. She said later in life that, well, not all the time, but the point I'm trying to make is that Black love is Black wealth. And we were in that space. So you want to go over there? All right, we're here. Now we build something, and then you decide you want it, and then you come over there and take it. You run a highway through it, and you put it. She said, I'm quite angry about that. This wasn't Nikki Giovanni at 28. This wasn't the Nikki Giovanni of Nikki Rosa. This wasn't the Nikki Giovanni of ego tripping. This is the Nikki Giovanni of 80 years old, returning to Knoxville and being interviewed about it and said, and by the way, what the hell? And guess what? There is no reparations for this. There should be reparations, but there's no repair for what you've done to the physical space, because when we had to move because y'all knocked our house down and we went to a nicer house physically, what I left in that patch of grass where that sign is in front of there, that was my soul. She said Knoxville was my heart, not because of Knox, but because of the people who raised me, because of my grandmother, my grandfather, my grandmother, who went to a meeting while I'm a little girl coming here after I left Cincinnati, and I'm back over here and Cincinnati area, and I'm back over here. And then she in the meeting, she said, me and my husband are too old to march, but my granddaughter will do it for me. And I'm like, I will? Yes, I will. So, I mean, this is all that. As Living Color said in Letter to a Landlord, you can tear a building down, but you can't erase a memory. She never let that go. She never let that go. And her story is all of our story. As they fight to try to get the little house that I was raised in Nashville. And every time a phone call comes or a letter comes, it gives me great pleasure to write back. It will be a hot day in your cold ass ice origins. If I got to stand out here and do a different type of violence, courtroom violence, let's just say. But the point is this: reading the interview, I'm gonna tell you how detached these things are, because they're interested in Nikki Giovanni. They're interested in congratulating themselves for putting up a plaque after they've committed real estate violence. So in the interview, they quote her as saying, Each generation has to fight. She said, you got to fight this now. You got to fight this displacement. We fought it. Our generation fought it. We didn't win all the battles. This is one we lost. But we did have warriors. And she says, we had warriors like Avon, and I forget the name they quote her as saying, and maybe in the moment her memory slipped. I'd have to listen to the recording because the Avon she's referring to is the brother who also came out of Knoxville, who went to Johnson C. Smith undergraduate, black institution, before going off to law school. The man who was the junior law partner of the great Z. Alexander Luby. This week, Larry interviewed a brother who teaches at Meharry Medical College, who was a historian of Meharry and of North Nashville, and he asked them about the bombing of the home of Z. Alexander Luby, the black civil rights attorney in Nashville, who, when they tried to kill him and his wife in North Nashville, the explosion was so violent that it blew out 200 windows at Meharry Medical College across the street. Larry talked about that. Well, Z. Alexander Luby's younger law partner was from Knoxville, Avon Nyanza Williams. Avon N. Williams. I knew Avon Williams. I helped Avon Williams in a moment. I'll tell you about that again. We talked about this again, but I'm going to tie it to Nikki Giovanni because they both in the same area, and she evoked Avon Williams' name when they rededicated the sign. And she said, we fought. We had lawyers, we had people like that. She didn't say people, but the reporter got the last name wrong. Doesn't surprise me. No white people remember Avon Williams, and too few black people remember Avon Williams. Now, the point I'm trying to make, well, the point I'll make with this in a moment is this. Avon Williams, who they once called the angriest black man in Tennessee, he go in the courtroom and beat these white boys, beat these, I use hillbillies, obviously, as a euphemism for other words that I would use, but I'm calming my spirit at this moment. Because when Avon Williams went to court, following the footsteps of his Jegna, his elder law partner, and that, of course, would be the great Z. Alexander Luby. Mr. Luby, who my father went to get after the white man that sold my father and mother the house that I grew up in, little house in South Nashville, across the street from his blood brother Virgil's house, because they were two of the first black people to come in that little neighborhood in South Nashville, which then became all black and then had a few white people. And now they want to take the whole thing because, like Nikki Giovanni said, they throw you in this part, and then once they leave, they want you to, and you create a community, and that's beautiful. And then they want it back, and then they want to put you out. Well, that's the same rhythm in South Nashville, where I'm from. Mr. Luby went to court and stopped that white man because after he sold the house to us, I say us like I had a stake in it. I was an infant, toddler. This is around 67, so I was about 2 years old. Mr. Luby went to court because that same white man then turned around and tried to sell it to another white man after my father had signed the paper. Mr. Luby saved our house. That's why I had the house that I grew up in. Z. Alexander Luby did that. His law partner was Avon Williams. Avon Williams went to court in 1968 with Rita Sanders Geyer, who's from the DC area. They sued because the University of Tennessee, Nashville tried to put a campus in the middle of Nashville, Tennessee, because they didn't want to go to school with the N-words in North Nashville, because right there on Jefferson Street, you got Fisk, across the street, Meharry, down the street, Tennessee A&I, now Tennessee State, all in one place. And Williams went to court with them, sued, and for the first time in U.S. history, a black school and a white school merged, and the black school took over the white school. And I helped Avon Williams, then sick with the disease that took his life, in a wheelchair. I helped him cut the ribbon when they renamed the old University of Tennessee Nashville campus the Avon Williams campus of Tennessee State University. And this is what the hillbillies in Tennessee are trying to now force Tennessee State to sell, because they say Tennessee State has this huge, almost $50 million deficit, even though they owe Tennessee State $2 billion. You funky hillbillies, let's dance forever. You're going to dance till your soul falls out of your body, because we, as Nikki Giovanni said, have to take on, each generation got to take that fight on. But if you start it from scratch, you'll never win. They never forget. They're going back to 1968, Jason Mumpire, Governor Bill Lee, all these hillbillies in Tennessee who think they can just outweigh. And then the president of Tennessee State resigned this week. I'm sure they sent him there to do a job. Get your grubby hands on that campus, flat line, take it down to the studs, as this white nationalist MAGA comptroller Jason Mumpire was saying. But that guy had to go. And they put in place a new interim president. He was former chair of the board. He's from Nashville. I don't know too much about him, but I know this. That generation looks like it's fighting. And we are going to fight in this generation. This generation is fighting. And Nikki Giovanni said every generation got to fight. And so when she evoked Avon Williams, I was like, wow, except it didn't say Avon Williams in the Knoxville newspapers. It said Avon some other name. And I thought either she doesn't remember, which I'm not sure that's the case, or the white reporter got it wrong and figured I'll just put a name in here. And there you have the idea. There's no fact checker at the Knoxville newspaper who will remember, black or white. Maybe there's a black one. Maybe there's a white one who took an interesting civil rights class at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, because there are professors there who could tell you about Avon and Williams. But it got in the paper, and people will say, oh, that's interesting. And you might have looked it up. And when you didn't see it, you said, I guess it's somebody. That's one of the greatest civil rights lawyers of the period. My point is this. The things that happen to us continue, but our memory gets short-circuited. And so then we celebrate things like it's the first thing that ever happened, or we lament things like it's the first time we faced a crisis, and we don't get the benefit of the momentum of memory of the things that we have triumphed over before, or the lessons, as Nikki Giovanni says. When you read her writing, she'll talk about things like there's no such thing as not having a lesson to learn from life experiences. You might have to sit in it for a minute, even if not to know what not to do. And of course, this is just stuff she's received from the elders. She's lived on her own. And as she makes transition, we have the moment and to be able to reflect on her life and what she said and done as a way to get back into that question. Can we take this blackness that we often talk about and recraft it beyond a response to trauma and use it beyond a strategy for resistance to become a space for social perfectibility? In other words, is blackness just going to be a response to whiteness perpetually? So her mother's people, we talked about her mother's parents. Her grandfather loved the stars. Going to Mars in part, people said, when did you first think about space travel? She said, my grandfather would go out on a dark night and say, look up in the sky, and we would look at the stars. This is institutional memory. You've got to fight back. You've got to fight back against this cannibalistic culture that will excise Rollins. They call him Avon Rollins. Avon Rollins. Not Avon Williams. Avon Williams is the man's name. But at any rate, you got to fight back against this cannibalistic culture that excises individuals, that takes out individuals and not communities. Virginia Tech is a community. Nikki Giovanni, at a moment of slaughter on that campus, stands at the podium. We are Virginia Tech. This becomes a thing that's played over and over and over and over and over again. But how many people before right now knew about the real estate violence on Mulvaney Street and the Black Bottom of Knoxville? I'm going to go out on a limb and say 99% of the people, unless you're a Nikki Giovanni fan. And even if you are, maybe you didn't know, because that rededication of the marker happened in February, I think it was, this year. So I'm saying all that to say that, this question of Virginia Tech and the speech that she gave there, we are Virginia Tech, very important, poignant moment, coming out of a governance logic to inform a larger social structure and impact it. So, yeah, I mean, Prof, the blessing of me being able to be with the Sirius XM family and do 3 days a week. And then one day the message comes through, Mike Vick wants to come and talk about the rise of the black quarterback. Itself a demonstration of governance logic. Because when Nikki Giovanni was at Fisk, after going down there as a teenager, she was 16 or 17 when she enrolled at Fisk. She finished school early. And then being put out by a dean because she goes home a day early for Thanksgiving without telling anybody. When she comes back on Monday to say, I went to see my grandparents in Knoxville. Oh, no, young lady, you didn't tell me. Oh, yeah, well, I don't think okay, you're out. February of that, February, they put her out. And it's interesting because she doesn't come back for a few years, but in those years, grandparent makes transition. In those years, in fact, I want to say her grandmother passed a few months after that, which means if she had been in school, she wouldn't have been there. No, grandfather. Her grandfather first, then her grandmother. Her grandfather passed, and so she wouldn't have been there. It's interesting how the ancestors work, but she did come back. But while she was in school at Fisk, Eldridge Dickey was down Jefferson Street throwing footballs with both hands, ambidextrous, the man they called the Lord's Prayer, perhaps the greatest quarterback to ever suit up for Tennessee A&I, and one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play football, who they didn't let play quarterback in the then American Football League. But I'm saying that all of that plays into the idea of, I'm looking at Michael Vick, who is athletically a descendant of the Eldridge Dickey style, the running and passing quarterback. And when we got a chance to interview him, I wanted to ask him, before we get to your project, which is in itself a governance formation, because he's talking about Eldridge Dickey in this. Half those quarterbacks he's talking about prior to Warren Moon and them guys came out of HBCUs, and there's still a stream there, as we know, of course, was the case with Steve McNair out of Alcorn State. And before we get to the project, the first question I want to ask you, brother, is about Nikki Giovanni, because you went to Virginia Tech. Did you take a class with Nikki Giovanni? And Michael Vick then talks. I think it was supposed to be like a 10-minute, 15-minute top interview. By the end of 35, 40 minutes, Sway is trying to get in the studio in New York, and they telling him, okay, well, we got to wrap it. No problem. I mean, he done lost track of time. Because we're not entering this conversation, brother, from a social structure. You are not a ball player, sir. Although you were a brilliant player of football, you are a human being. And you and your wife and the producer, another brother who did a film on Fritz Pollard, the so-called first black football player in the NFL, all y'all got together, and Mike Vick says, my wife's really urging me to do this, and I was in conversation. We're going to talk about Michael Vick, the human. Not Michael Vick could run like a deer. He was fast. Okay, you take all that shit over there, and you go with Aaron Rodgers and your mama and whoever else y'all got, and y'all talk about ball. But right now, we're going to talk about human beings. Somebody asked you about Nikki Giovanni, and Michael Vick then talked about how it was my favorite class. I rarely have ever missed that class. Nikki never let me get away with anything. She used to call on me all the time. I like to sit in the back because I like to be shy. What we didn't get on tape was what we were talking about before, which led to the questions, because we were setting up and we were getting the microphones right. And that's when I first asked him. So some of what he said, he repeated because we were waiting. I said, you went to Virginia? And he started talking about how, yeah, I had to sit in the back in part because if I sat in the front, all these students would be asking me for autographs. So I'm sitting in her face and they passing up paper and I'm signing the autographs and sending them back. They just sitting in the back. But he never let me get away with anything, never let my classmates get away with anything, because she taught the athletes. You understand? In fact, Nikki Giovanni would say in interview after interview after interview, so everybody doesn't want to go to college. Some people want to be plumbers. Some people want to be musicians. Some people don't think they need college. He said, but this is why I think everybody, whether you go to college or not, needs to have some college type experience in this vein, if nothing else. You need to sit with literature. You need to read. And Prof, as you grapple with your students and as I grapple with them, I got a couple more days of grading to do, turn these last grades in. You read these papers, some of which clearly there was some artificial help. And it's like, but you realize that, the sitting with literature, because half of what they did in the classroom was reading and responding, reading and having conversations. And, Brother Vic talked about that. This whole question of intellectual work, which is what we call in Philadelphia Freedom Schools, and I'm going to switch that in a moment, finish talking about Nikki Giovanni, but the whole question of how we perfect Blackness cannot have as its center ball playing and singing and dancing and rapping. All this is great cultural meaning making, yes, but it is not governance when it is excised from its larger context. Because when you take away Black institutions and replace them with white narratives and white institutions who will then cherry pick the Blackness and take the individuals out, then you get Mike Vick, the ball player, who should be asked a question like that at the beginning of every interview. You went to Virginia Tech, what was your, and maybe now that Nikki Giovanni has made transition, somebody will ask him. Maybe if they listen to Sirius, they will, because I've never heard anybody ask him that question. And his way his face lit up when we were first doing it before it mic'd up and then came back to the mic, seems to me that might have been the first time. I mean, but my point is this, the cannibalistic nature. Whiteness wants everything. And as I said the other night, I'll be damned if I'm going to give whiteness everything. So when Baldwin and Giovanni are talking, and he's like, look, when I'm out there, and she's like, yeah, I understand, but then lie to me at home. He said, I don't want to lie to you, but you do lie to me. Oh, it was incredible. People say she was so young. She's 28 years old. She's a grown woman. She's younger than him. But let's be clear. Oh, what a poignant moment. What a poignant moment. We lie to each other all the time. We do it all the time. Human beings lie to human beings. My question in terms of Blackness is, what are the dimensions of that are also colored by experience racially? And when you empty yourself at the end of the day, when you empty yourself in that feeling of release that can come also with the pain that might make you put your hands on somebody, that might make you cuss somebody out, that might make a child or anybody else say, why did you do that? And say, have you ever been Black in America? Have you ever been Black in Africa or the Caribbean? Have you ever suffered at the hands of a racial oppression and where you said you couldn't say anything and you came and took it out on your boyfriend, your girlfriend? You say, wait a minute, hold on, that's unforgivable. Well, let's not go that far. Or perhaps let's go that far. But if we're going to do that, let's make that decision based in sitting institutionally with a momentum of memory that has us in Black spaces. Because the minute you try to have that conversation in a larger space, somebody else comes in. Yeah, I had it. I don't want to hear the experience you had. Don't you understand? Every day I see you, it's a kiki in the streets. Don't follow me into this intimate space to have this conversation. Maybe we can have it later. But as Nikki Giovanni did in her practice, she didn't work at a HBCU. Nikki Giovanni commuted in New York to Livingston College at the City University of New York. You knew who she used to ride with from time to time? The great Tony Cade Bombara. So these Black women who are responsible for transforming lives as teachers. I think about my man Nate Norman, who knew Nikki Giovanni. Nate Norman, who was at City College of New York for many years with Tony Cade Bombara and Barbara Christian and Wilfred Carty. And so many others who were there, Addison Gale, they're grappling with how do we grapple with these working class students, these poor students, these African students, whether they speak Spanish or English. I'm not saying Blacks and Puerto Ricans. Somebody explain that to me later because I doubt you'll be able to. But I know you will, but you know what I mean. There's some Africans who speak Spanish and there's some who don't. But my point is that in that whole process, they are in spaces that aren't HBCUs, that may be majority non-white and even majority Black. Medgar Evers, for example. Shout out Larry, as always. These are Black spaces. I don't make a distinction really between them and places they call HBCUs. It's a legal or a technical or a policy-making decision. I really don't make a distinction there. Kim Delaney, Chicago State, Larry, Medgar Evers. I don't make that distinction. But I will say this. When you excise Black people out of those spaces and they're in white spaces like a Virginia Tech, Nikki Giovanni excised out of those Black institutional spaces, although near the end of her life, her friend Ruth Simmons recruits her to come to Prairie View and be a writer in residence, which is a beautiful thing because Ruth Simmons, a daughter of Dillard University, a graduate of Dillard University, and she's the president. You read her, you read what they say about her. Dr. Ruth Simmons was the first Black woman president of an Ivy League institution. Yes, she came out of Dillard, and when she came back out of retirement, went to Prairie View, she started bringing some of that stuff into those Black spaces. And one of the reasons that the hillbilly horde in Texas wanted her out at Prairie View is because they know they couldn't get around her intellectually. See, this is gang. I think that's what they say in Philly. That's gang. In other words, they got a gang, and what do you got? You got heroic individuals. Shout out to Jay-Z and Kendrick Lamar at the Super Bowl. You got heroic individuals. They not like, who is they? Anyway, who is us? Because institutions determine who us is. Individuals determine who you is to them. And so at Virginia Tech, she brings all that humanity to bear. She's not going to sway. She's not going to sway like she was in that conversation with James Baldwin. She's not going to swerve. And if she is saying, I didn't tell the truth there, she's going to say, I didn't tell the truth there. She's not going to hold it back. That is coming out of institutional formations that allow her to be an individual in Black institutional spaces that then contribute to the larger social structures. That's what we want. But guess what? Those institutions aren't there anymore in the same way. Now you got heroic individuals. So you got obituaries and television clips and New York Times obituaries, and they're going to put that Virginia Tech thing right there and gloss over the Black spaces, except very quickly. Very quickly. Her father's people out of Mobile, Mattie Jones and Thomas Giovanni. And I'm sorry, that's her grandparents. Her parents, of course, Jones, Gus Giovanni, and Yolanda Cornelia Watson Sr. met in Knoxville College, and they moved forward out of that. So you got to think of family and community as part of the larger body of work and not let this social structure pull out individuals and elevate them almost like a pair of earrings or a bracelet or a nice necklace or maybe a nice dress or suit or a tie on white nationalism. Because they didn't do what they did for you, system. They did it in spite of you. But the in spite of you can't be the framework through which we interpret who we are. That's why we had to have an Africana Studies framework. Who we are to each other cannot be the way we think of ourselves. Who we are to other people, social structure can't be the framework. It's got to be who we are to each other. And people say, well, Black studies is a study of Black stuff. It is not. Anybody who is not making that distinction is not doing Africana studies as far as I'm concerned. Not that my opinion matters, because that contempt is mutual. That opinion might not matter, and that's fine, because I'm not going to stop what I'm doing. This is a lot of years of study and a lot of years of community and a lot of years of Black institutions, which are a deliberate choice for me, as for so many other people. And so I'm not going to change that. So if you want to read more about soul, you can watch the television show. You can get the book, It's Been Beautiful, Soul and Black Power Television by Gail Wall, who talks about all the other shows that were on the air at the time. This is also the period when you see the birth of Soul Train. So how is it that we still talking about dancing down the Soul Train line, but not Ellis Hazlett, whose niece, Melissa, the good sister, Melissa Hazlett? I remember when she was raising money for the documentary she produced, she came here to DC and we did a screening at Howard of about a 20-25 minute screener as she was raising money for a documentary that I absolutely think we should watch in Nubia and Refill, called Soul, which is the history of that television show. And then you see all these other incredible people having these conversations, and you like, wow. So now that clip between Baldwin and Giovanni, where James Baldwin agrees to be interviewed, but he says, I don't have time to come back across the Atlantic to come to New York. Can you send her to London? And Nikki Giovanni tells Ellis Hazlett, I will walk to London to interview James Baldwin. So that's one reason. And she talks about this as well. She says, that's why when you see the lighting, she said the British approached that interview differently than the Americans might have approached it. So when people say, oh, look at the lighting, look at the attention on the eyes, look on the hands, she said, that's what they're doing there. I'm not sure that would have happened in the United States. It wasn't filmed in the United States, but the lesson there, the lesson I've been talking about all over, now I'm going to shift in a second, is the perfectibility of Blackness. Is it possible? Is it possible? The perfectibility of Blackness. You can't pick, everybody has their favorite Nikki Giovanni poem, Aretha Franklin, Nikki Rosa. I love Ego Tripping. Of course, I turn myself into myself. I mean, come on, Nikki Giovanni. What are you doing? I mean, if you want to start a history lesson of African people, which I'm going to come back to in a second, dealing with the 1619 Project in a moment, because she was approached about writing from something for the 1619 Project, and I want to read that quote directly. Hey, you could do a whole lot worse than Ego Tripping, because Nikki Giovanni starts with the beginning of time and space and brings it all the way through to the moment. That's the way you frame the momentum of memory and a governance formation. Her album, Truth Is on the Way, with the New York Community Choir and Peace Be Still, that cut alone. I mean, I love them all, but Nikki Rose is on there, but that Peace Be Still, oh my God. The perfectibility of Blackness. Individuals don't be institutions. This, I think it's 1971 when she does Truth Is on the Way. This is around the time when she's publishing with another Black institution. She self-publishes her first book of poetry. She's in New York. She's finished Fisk. She goes up to go to graduate school. At first, she's at University of Pennsylvania. She's working in social work in Wilmington, Delaware. And then from there, she drops out of school at UPenn, but she continues to work in Wilmington. Then she goes to New York. She's working as a poet. She enrolls at Columbia, do some work there. And she's writing her poetry. She's funding it herself. She goes to Birdland and asks them, could I possibly have a poetry reading here? And the owner says, yeah. I tell you what, if you can get 100 people to come, you can have a place for free. If you don't have 100 people, you got to pay me $500. And she said, I can do that. And then she says, I'm coming up the steps out of Birdland, Midtown Manhattan. I'm coming out of the step, and I realized I just shook hands with a guy who kills people. In other words, the gangster, fortunately, there were not 100 people there. There were hundreds of people. And Nikki Giovanni begins to achieve some prominence. She then republishes some of that stuff and then new work with the good brother out of Detroit, the great Dudley Randall, Broadside Press. And all my stuff is in storage. I mean, I have those early, I got a lot of those early ones, because when you see that early stuff out of the Black Arts Movement, the stuff from the late 60s, early 70s, the small little they're pamphlets. Donnell Lee, before he was Hockey My Booty, and then Hockey My Booty. Nikki Giovanni, all those little pieces. I had one of them here I was looking for. This is Third World Press. This is Angela Jackson, who did a biography on Gwendolyn Brooks, Voodoo Love Magic. These are the kind, though. This is Third World Press. See, $1.50 other books in the First Poet System series. Angela Jackson is here, of course, Chester Fuller, Olumo, Jim Cunningham. But she then publishes an early anthology of Black women poets that includes Maury Evans and others. All these were her friends. On the few occasions I got a chance to see Nikki Giovanni and even be around her, it was usually here, sometimes other places, but usually here. And she was in conversation with her friends, her dear friend Eleanor Traylor, who was on the faculty for Howard for a number of years. I remember one night they were all sitting around talking, and it was like listening to your grandparents. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sure. But your grandmothers. So the curse words that you have heard your grandmother say, imagine when they're in the mouths of poets of eternal fame. Anyway, so I mean, Maya Angelou, you know, Toni Morrison, Miss Morrison. I mean, you know, sometimes smoking cigarettes, sometimes having a drink, whatever, and then commenting on everything from reality TV. These conversations will not be shared at this moment. But just imagine, you've been around old Black people, particularly elder Black women. Nikki Giovanni was in that crew. These are her people. You understand? And so she meets them not when she's 80 or 70 or 60, 50, 40. She's meeting them in her 20s. Amina Baraka. This is the Black arts movement, which is a movement, not a brick and mortar movement, although there were institutions for the people. Black World. It is these young poets. In fact, go back a few more years back now. She comes back to Fisk. She graduates in 66, if memory serves me correctly, 66 or 67. She comes back. She then begins to apprentice with the writer in residence at Fisk, the great John Oliver Killens, John O. Killens, the novelist, the cotillion, and then we heard the thunder. John Oliver Killens, the great writer and teacher of writers, who started these Black writers conferences at Fisk University, and also contributed later to conferences at Howard and other places. But Fisk, it is at the Fisk Writers Conference, I think it was 66. It was reported in Black World. In fact, if you go get Black World from 1966, maybe November 1966, the cover article is on the Black Writers Conferences at Fisk. And I'm looking over there because all my Black Worlds are there. Well, many of them. The other ones are in storage, and I don't think the 66 is there. I did a quick scan about 4 o'clock this morning, didn't see it. So I stopped looking because it just pains me. Okay. Anyway, the point is you can see all the Black Worlds, though. They're in Google Books. If you look up Black World, Fisk Black Writers Conference, you'll see the report. Gwendolyn Brooks, who won the Pulitzer Prize in 1950. Doesn't mean anything. It does mean anything. You decide. But she is a writer of prominence, a Black writer in the United States, a Negro writer who is considered very prominent. She comes to this conference and she's listening to these young people. It isn't just Robert Hayden. It isn't just Amiri Baraka. It isn't just Killens. It isn't just all her contemporaries doing readings at this Black Writers Conference, they're debating. You owe it to yourself to read the debates that took place there. They're talking about what is the role of the artist to the revolution? What is the role of the artist to the Black community? What is the responsibility of artists, Black artists, to each other? It is a richer, deeper, and more well-considered conversation than anything being discussed today. People say you shouldn't compare then and now. I will absolutely do that because I have the momentum of memory. People who say that usually don't have the momentum of memory, or they want to identify their mission and betray it, to go back to Frantz Fanon, because they don't see it as a mission. Because I don't care the community. I love the community, but I'm an individual. I got to say, okay, fine. Then you go with God. That's fine. And when we win, you will benefit too. But you know, it's cool. Ain't nobody gonna argue with you. But when you read the debates, so very important. But what I want to focus on for a split second is what happens in the evenings. They have these poetry readings, and they have these readings, and they have these fiction readings and nonfiction. And they're talking, debating, and having this kind of Saunders Redding is there. So many different people are having a conversation. So in the context of it, Killen said, I got some young people I want y'all to hear. Nikki Giovanni is one of the young poets, Fisk University student. Gwendolyn Brooks is so moved by these young people that she cancels her contract with the white publisher. This is the Black poet that they picked, that they curated, that they excised and brought out. She's writing her thing now. Miss Gwendolyn Brooks gonna be Gwendolyn Brooks. Auntie Allen, I think, is one that kind of brought her to prominence. She wins the Pulitzer in 1950. But after going to that conference, and especially seeing those young people, including a young Nikki Giovanni, Gwendolyn Brooks says, I'm not publishing with these. She's in the biggest publishing houses in the country, white publishing houses. She then turns and says, I'm publishing with Black publishing companies. What? Young Haki Mahbooty, Third World Press. Dudley Randall, Broadside Press. Gwendolyn Brooks starts publishing with Black publishers. She said these young people saw, they showed me I've got a ground in my blackness. Individuals don't beat institutions. There are some brilliant black poets. There are some brilliant black writers. And how many of them publish in black publishing companies? Not black fronted, not the top agent at the white company, not the Negro they stick out to attract the other Negroes. No, I'm talking about black publishing companies. Toni Morrison was at a white company, and she used that perch to acquire manuscripts by Ivan Van Sertima. They came before Columbus. Angela Davis, the autobiography of Angela Davis. Huey Newton, To Die for the People. Gail Jones, Corregidor. She's acquiring these titles. My friend Dana Williams is writing on that. Toni Morrison's time at Random House. But the reason she gets elevated to do that work is because the black man who was there before her resigns from Random House. Why? Because the new president of Howard University, because the students ran the other president out, and his lieutenant, who's still here, my man Andrew Billingsley, now in his mid-90s, came to me, got on the train from DC, came to New York to Random House, said, who's the baddest black publisher in the game? You got to go see Charles. Brother Charles, would you consider leaving Random House and coming to start a black university press? He said yes. He left. Toni Morrison moves up. The rest is history. Everybody talks about she was at Random House. Yeah, but what about the guy who was there before, who went to Howard for Howard University Press, which continues to publish to this day, black academics? Wait. Oh, no, it doesn't. Anyway, the point is this: out of business. Individuals don't beat institutions. There was a moment in the 60s and 70s when black people not only understood that on their own, they understood it because they had the momentum from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. Because guess who else is at the Fifth Writers Conference? Those black writers who are still alive from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. They bring that momentum forward. You know, one of the main reasons that we know James Baldwin, early Baldwin, is because they were trying to create a reality show beef between James Baldwin and Richard Wright, everybody's protest novel. Who is they? The black institutions that know. The cherry pickers, the cannibals, the individual excisers, the ones who create beef and then watch, the ones who take the battery, the small, I guess, what's the smallest battery? Is it AA, AAA battery in the back of Stephen A. Smith and send him out to talk against, no, they've been doing that forever. Now, Baldwin, like Giovanni, is going to keep going the way he's going to go. So this ain't got nothing to do with James Baldwin or Nikki Giovanni or anybody else who's been picked, because when they come into space, they're going to stay who they are. But it does create a situation where that notion of blackness as a response to whiteness becomes the only thing people are interested in. And then we start catching that disease once integration comes in. This is why I'm going to switch now to a minute, because I think about that. My lifelong struggle, which I'll continue till I stop breathing, is to harness literacy in the service of expanding our concept of who we are by linking to that momentum of memory. But I, like everybody here right now, if you're of a certain age, if you over 40 years old, really 30, but really 40, I suppose, you have been alive at a moment when the collapse of literacy has just exploded. And I think about that because in many ways, the Black arts movement was about the perfectibility of Blackness. It achieved a certain escape velocity. And that escape velocity was due to the Black institutions, whether it be the East in Brooklyn or Third World Press and Ebony, which published Black World in Chicago, or Black Arts South in New Orleans, whether it was the institutions for the people in Detroit, the Shrine of the Black Madonna, Broadside Press. This is what created Nikki Giovanni, her sister Sonia Sanchez, who still walks the earth, publishing in those Black presses. Now Sonia publishes in the white presses. Now, for many years, William Morrow is where Nikki Giovanni found a home to publish. Incredible work, important work, transformative work. William Morrow, by the way, a controlling stake in William Morrow is owned by, who owns that? Let me think. Oh, yeah, Rupert Murdoch. Anyway, the point is, because I saw a beautiful tribute to Nikki Giovanni they did in the New York Times. So Nikki Giovanni in memoriam. And it was in the same, maybe yesterday's paper, the same paper where I'm reading about the fight between the murder. And one of the things they say is the things they own. And one of them is a stake in Morrow. Anyway, the point is this. So it doesn't matter what people are saying. It can be beautiful. It could be contrarian. It could be criticizing. It could be Buckley versus Baldwin at the Oxford debating. Yeah, but the spectacle is controlled by institutions that we don't own. So ultimately, There's important work to be done there. This isn't critiquing that at all, but it's witnessing that individuals don't beat institutions. So I spent my whole adult life trying to weaponize literacy in Black spaces. And so today I'm going to go up to Philly because Philadelphia Freedom Schools, like I said, there's a convening. It's going to be a beautiful thing where we all get together. Some folks are coming in town from all over. So we're going to have that conversation about the history of Freedom School, and they'll ask me to say a few words, and I will, but not a whole lot, because I'll be quite honest with you. It's very painful for me in some ways, but it's a pain that I am grateful for because it's the pain of experience, because I have watched literacy collapse. I know that when I went with Kenny Holzman, a white dude who ran service learning for the School District of Philadelphia for years, in 1999, February 1999, when my boss, Cassandra Watson Jones, Dr. Jones, good sister, master teacher, came out the same public schools as Joyce Abbott, as in Abbott Elementary, same sensibility, Philly through and through, had risen to the ranks of the senior leadership in the School District of Philadelphia, eventually became the superintendent, actually, of Baltimore Public Schools. Cassandra sent me and Kenny down to Haley Farm, and she had never heard of it. Children's Defense Fund, of course, bought the farm that Alex Haley bought in, where was that part of Tennessee? Oh, yeah, Clinton, Tennessee. That's right outside of Knoxville. Somehow Nikki Giovanni is all through this. Clinton, Tennessee. And Nikki Giovanni did work with Children's Defense Fund as well, by the way. Of course, that's right there in her backyard. Sent us down there for to hear about Freedom Schools, the Children's Defense Fund Freedom Schools, the great Marion Wright Edelman. She was there. We sat there. We were there for about 3 days, nonstop meetings. And at night, we'd all eat together and sit around and talk, because the idea was they wanted Philadelphia to get involved in freedom schools. And Philadelphia wanted to be involved because the superintendent at the time, David Hornbeck, white man. And I mentioned that because David Hornbeck said, I'm the superintendent of the Philadelphia Public Schools. I'm also the chair of the board of the Children's Defense Fund. And so while I have these positions, I want to do something that will advance this concept of literacy in these spaces. The Children's Defense Fund had been doing something called CDF Freedom Schools since they met. Talk about institutions with resources. I think it was like 1986 and 1987. They pulled together a group called the Black Community Crusade for Children. Later, they dropped the Black. It became the Community Crusade for Children. But they met in Bellagio, Italy. There's a retreat there, apparently. I've heard it talked about many times. Never been. Maybe never will go. Maybe hopefully never will go. Because again, there's that thing where you go into space and you hear the birds singing and the waterfall and everything, and you think to yourself, yeah, we're going to lose. Because you can get so comfortable, and say, well, I'm here to rest and recharge. I can rest and recharge on the corner of 125th and 7th Avenue. Anyway, but the point is this, or any place I can get quiet for a minute. But they decide to create this freedom school model, and they've been going for a while. Well, Hornbeck comes in, superintendent of Philly schools, and he says, how much freedom school costs? Well, between $40,000 and $60,000. Why? Because you got to pay the teachers, which are college age students. You got to provide food and lunch and, breakfast for the young people, the children. Okay. You got to buy books for everybody. All the books are free for freedom school kids. They're books centered in Black experiences. They have 4 levels, level 1, 2, 3, 4. The 4th level is high school students. And so all of that together, and the facility, you got to get a facility. Okay. It's going to cost you between $40,000 and $60,000. Well, why the price fluctuation? Well, part of it is if you can get the structure. If you're working with a school district, you can get a school building maybe for free, or just, pay the people who got to lock up and this kind of thing, people clean up. Or if you're in a church, you can have it in a church. So most of the freedom schools in the country were in churches. And usually one in a city, St. Louis, 1 or maybe 2, New York, in a city. The superintendent of Philly schools comes in 1999, and we come back with your report. Yeah, man, this is very interesting, which I'm going to talk about in a second. He says, okay, let's start with 7. What? Yeah. It's your tax money. Let's spend it. 7. Okay. And then next year, 2000, we're going to do 14. What? And then next year, 2022, we're going to do 21. What? You know who started losing their mind? Some Negro elected officials. This is very expensive, because while Hornbeck was using the money that way and convincing the policymakers at the school district to go along with him, and most of us didn't need any convincing, the politicians are fighting. The capital of Philadelphia, capital of Pennsylvania is Harrisburg. He's also party to a lawsuit because Hornbeck is suing the state of Pennsylvania for racial discrimination because equal protection has been violated because you've been underfunding the schools in Philadelphia. Pressure in Pennsylvania mounting to get him to drop the lawsuit. So this is a white dude. Interesting that Nikki Giovanni's grandfather was named John Brown. Now, her grandfather and David Hornbeck, one black, one white, neither one of them, to my knowledge, ever put their hands on anybody. But in the spirit of David Hornbeck has got a spirit of some white person. You want to be an ally? You do what David Hornbeck did. Hornbeck fighting the whole way. Eventually, he resigns rather than drop the lawsuit. Philadelphia schools ain't been the same since. Ain't been the same since. They sold the school district building downtown. It's on the Parkway. Now it's condos across the street from the Barnes Foundation because the same governor, Ed Rendell, y'all remember Easy Ed, Democratic Party guy, who was able to help get him out, Hornbeck out. They also broke the will of the Barnes Foundation, Albert Barnes had set it up for Lincoln University to benefit. They went in there, changed the will, got that art collection with the Cezannes and all that other stuff out of the suburbs, Marion, and got it downtown. They got their little strip now. They love their little walkway. My point is, individuals don't beat institutions, and these white institutions never forget, whether it be the Parkway in Philadelphia or the black bottom of Knoxville or South Nashville. They don't forget. Now, anyway, the point is this. Hornbeck, for the time he was there, dumping money in freedom schools. I'm put in charge of looking at curriculum. Okay. This is a meeting that may never happen again. This is a convergence. Because what I'm bringing to the table in 1999 and 2000 and 2001, 2, 3, I'm bringing all those years in black institutions. And I'm talking about the African-centered institutions. Aisha Shule and Du Bois Academy out of New York. I'm sorry, out of Detroit. Mama Imani Humphrey. Baba Hannibal Afrique out of Chicago. The great Jituwe Usi out of the Ocean Hill Brownsville struggle in Brooklyn, New York, who then comes as one of the founders of the East. All these African people, Baba Ajay Akoto in Nation House here in DC, in Philadelphia, Ivy Leaf Academy, and John Skeef and Harambe, all of these institutions, which are now by the late 90s, they've achieved the ability to reach into the social structure coffers and begin to repurpose some of those dollars for the African-centered schools that started in the 60s and 70s. This was a huge fight in the 90s. I remember it. I was at the table for many of these fights. Do we take charter school money? With this white nationalist coming in office now, Donald Trump, I'm telling you right now, let's use the First Amendment. Let's use the establishment. Let's use the freedom of association. If y'all want charters and y'all want vouchers, we want the money too for our African-centered schools. Y'all want to dance this dance? You want your Klan school? We're going to get our school. And it's not co-equal. What I'm saying is it's a legal strategy to pursue it. I've seen it happen in the 90s. So in Philly, you get Imani for elementary school students, charter school. You get Kepra, which is a middle school, African-centered school, and you get the Imhotep Public Charter High School, which still exists. This predates Sankofa Freedom Academy, the only K-12 freedom school we had in Philadelphia, in part because when those schools come into existence, I'm in the city. I'm working for the school district part of that time. When they put me in charge of helping to build the leadership model for Philadelphia Freedom Schools, we realized two things, and I'm kind of bring this home. The level 4 for the Children's Defense Fund, level 1 is the little kids. Level 2, they're a little bit older. Level 3, get like middle school. Level 4, high school students. You can't get high school students to come to a 6-week summer program because you're not paying them and they can get a job. They're now 16, 17 years old. They are going to go work. They're not going to take a month and a half, no matter how much you talk about black culture and books. And no. So what we did in Philadelphia, we paid the high school students and we didn't put them in the classroom. We made them teaching assistants and we called them junior servant leaders, because in the Children's Defense Fund model, the college age students who were teaching, one teacher, 10 students in a class, 10 classrooms. So you have 100 little children, 10 people on the faculty who are college age students, and you have supervisors and other kind of things. You pay the teachers. The students get food, the students get books, the students get all programs, trips, everything. You pay for the structure and everything, and you got a freedom school. In Philly, we put 2 high school students in each classroom with the college age student. Now you got 20 high school students. And so we didn't put them in the classroom. We made them teaching assistants and we paid them. That's your job. And once a week, we pulled them out. I picked a book, and for years they read a book together. And then eventually that gets integrated into the curriculum. because my thing was we're going to get one shot at this. So every book I picked, the first year I didn't pick a book because it was a children's defense model. So they had a book for these young people. We still paid them, and they read the book in like half a week. It's like Forged by Fire by Sharon Draper, which is a nice little book, but that ain't no book I ever would have picked because it starts with the trauma. I'm fine. It's fine. That will never happen. I'll never get to meet. That ain't gonna happen again. I'm picking the book from now on. The first book we picked was Randall Robinson, The Debt. We read Bakari Kitwana, The Hip Hop Generation. We read the Ella Baker book by Barbara Ransby. Ella Baker's birthday was just a couple of days ago. We read, oh my God, you don't get me started. We read Aikwe Armah, The Eloquence of the Scribes. We read one year, we read Carter G. Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro. And then we read during the summer, we read W.E.B. Du Bois, Souls of Black Folk, and Booker T. Washington, Up from Slavery, and then discussed and debated and contrasted. Shout out to my sister, Kelly Sparrow Mickens, who was our manager, who really, that was her idea. Brilliant, brilliant idea. My whole thing was whatever we pick, it's going to be something that they wouldn't read otherwise. Because you got graduate students that wasn't reading half the books we picked. But I don't care about that. This is our one shot at literacy. One time we read Exchanging Our Country Marks. Michael Gomez read 2 books by him. Reversing Sale. These are, now you think, well, these are honor students in Philadelphia? No. You know what the qualification was? Are you breathing? Yes. Do you want a job? Yes. Come on. It was overwhelmingly Black, including Black students who spoke Spanish and English. But it was also Asian students. Talk about real estate violence. We had a social action program every summer. One summer, our issue was no baseball stadium in Chinatown because we had a relationship with Asian Americans United in South Philadelphia. So we had Laotian students, Chinese students. We had Vietnamese students on a Freedom School site and 2 Freedom School sites in South Philly. They said, our issue is they're displacing our people in Center City. Said, well, then that's y'all issue. That's our issue. One year we read We Want Freedom. Mumia Abu Jamal brought the old Panthers from Philly back together to have a conversation with young people. Every year, about 4 years in, we had to break with Children's Defense Fund. What is y'all doing? We doing what you're doing. Not quite sure. No problem. Amicably, we'll just part. But before we leave, that brother who you have down there running your program, I think we're going to take him with us. That brother is named Cedric Miles. Anyway, so, I mean, look, I thought we not all cool. By the time we finished, most of the people who trained National Freedom School trainings, because they got bigger and bigger in Tennessee, most of the college students who became veterans who trained the rest of the students, over half of them were from Philadelphia because they had started as scholars, as like 6th, 7th, 8th graders. This is where Asheray Hines came from. They started as teenagers. This is where Shanice Thompson came from. And then they came through the program. Then they went to college. Now they know more about freedom schools because they've been in the classrooms and they've been teaching in the classrooms. So then they would go to training and train the freedom school students in CDF and come back to Philly and run the freedom schools in Philadelphia. We called ourselves the Maroon Freedom Schools. The symbol of the freedom schools was Jehudi and Ma'at. I took that from the Kemetic Institute, of which I'm a member, the Kemetic Institute Chicago. That's Jacob Carruthers. We did that work because we had to figure it out. At the time, the schools of Philadelphia had an independent office of curriculum development, Johnny Irizarry for Latino studies, the great Debbie Wade, Asian studies, Carolyn Holmes, African-American studies, all together. Oh, that's shut down now. That program has been gone. They had a pedagogical library. That library was destroyed when they sold the damn school district building and turned into condos and threw all those books away, except the ones I could get in there at night, me and Dana King, and try to salvage as many of them as we could. A whole library. Anytime you go in a damn public school and they start talking about we ain't got no library, we got a media center, you've seen the destruction of literacy. And I witnessed it. And we converged and tried our best. If you want and find, let me, with Freedom School and come back to Nikki Giovanni at the end. As I said, sessions 53, 109, 134, 138, and 141. I talk a little bit about Freedom School, but nowhere like I'm doing now. The Black institution must re-elevate the standards. We tried it with Freedom Schools. We succeeded and we failed because it isn't what it was. And I will never rest on that like it's some achievement that's in the past. As long as we're breathing, we must revive that. Nikki Giovanni represents institutional formations that projected her into time and space and helped her through her speech, through her being, help transform lives. And it also reminds us that we must remember that individuals don't be institutions. It is institutions that give us our soul. It is institutions that give us our soul. And so last week, no, this week, after Monday night, when we were office hours, and remember in office hours on Monday night, we're going to talk about governance. This was our last week talking about the governance conceptual category. We were reading Walter Rodney, chapter 4 of The Groundings with Our Brothers. We're going to now open it up to any other chapters because we got the whole thing there in narrative in the library and the digital bookshelf. So if you want to have conversation, please, about anything else around that book, come in Monday night prepared to do that. It's interesting because we had Eddie Grant on the radio this week in Sirius XM, of course, the brother who the world knows for "We're Gonna Go Down to Electric Avenue." Eddie Grant is a Garveyite. Eddie Grant then started talking about UC Korama and Walter Rodney and all those Black power thinkers and organizers in Guyana. His whole purpose in life is to project that culture. To the social structure is a couple of ditty tunes. He owns all his masters. You can go to his website, eddiegrant.com, EDDY, Grant, and see all of his stuff, including his life story. Important, but at any rate, so we're going to do that on Monday night. But going back to Nikki Giovanni. Oh, I do have the quote. Here's the quote. This is what she says. She says, I tell young people, you have to do, well, I'll read that second. Here's the quote I want to, the first of the two quotes I want to end with. The sister asked her down at James Madison University when they had this tribute to her about 4 years ago, 4-day tribute, week-long tribute, really. She said, have you ever gotten a rejection notice? Ever had something rejected? Let me read you what the answer was. Nikki Giovanni says this to the sister who's the director of the Furious Flower Center and Conference there at James Madison, a very important convening of Black poets, Black creatives, Black writers. She said, quote, I have to laugh because I haven't had any rejection letters in a moment. I haven't gotten a rejection letter in so long. The New York Times called and asked me because this is their 200th year anniversary of the thing in Jamestown. It was 1619 and this is 2019. So I guess it was 5 years ago. And so this is what Nikki Giovanni's saying. And so they're doing a thing on important things. And they called me and asked me, and I did what, in all fairness to everybody, is an incredibly beautiful piece. She's talking about the poem she wrote. She says, beautiful piece. And I turned it in. And the girl's name is Nicole, by the way. And Nicole said, okay, it doesn't have a date connected to it. I said, well, slavery has been with us since forever. And it's really wonderful. What I loved about it is I live in Virginia and we are the peanut capital. And the peanut is not normal for Virginia. Somebody had to bring it over. And so what I have, because we don't like to talk about it, but it's nonetheless true, is that Africans sold us to Europeans. And I have, because I'm a grandmother put a peanut in the hand of her grandson and said, don't forget me. And so he brings that, despite everything of Middle Passage, to America. He gets sold in Jamestown and he plants it. Now he's got this plant because he's promised his grandmother. And other people say, we're leaving tonight, And he says, I'm not leaving. Oh, you're just being a coward. You're just being an Uncle Tom. But he had a promise to keep. And I wanted to point out that he kept it. Virginia has a promise to keep, and it hasn't. And so it was rejected. Her poem was rejected from the 1619 project. Nicole said, well, you can't make some changes in it? And I said, no, sweetheart, I can't make changes in a beautiful, perfect piece. So I understand that you are the New York Times and I'm not. So I'm going to take my piece and it's called 1619 Jamestown and it's my piece and I'm going to keep it. I think that they're going to understand that it should open their piece. I don't care if they do or don't. It's going to be in my book. And I love that piece so much because we forget the promises we kept when we came to this country. Governance, who are Africans to each other. Come on now, she continues. And the country did not keep its promise to us. Social structure, who are we to other people? She continues and says, and so, you say, what do you do with rejection? What the hell? Go on about your business. She ends with this. There are stories about the Middle Passage. You just cry. There are stories about okra that we haven't gotten anywhere near. And I wanted to point out that Virginia had a promise to keep, and it hasn't. How did okra get here? And I think of that as a girl. It had to be a girl that brought that here. And it had to be something she remembered, her grandmother. These are things. There are things, and I'm just always being amazed at you youngsters not using your history. If you would use what you know and quit worrying about who does and doesn't like it, you'd have something.
Oof.
I can't make you do that. All I can do is what I do. I'm gonna end with that.
Oof.
You know what I'm saying? That's nigga Giovanni. You know what I'm saying?
What we do here every day, because we work when we're not here, propels me to keep going. And I thank you. When you think about Black publishing, I'd ask somebody who is published by the mainstream, why won't you bring that to us and help build? Because you don't need the money. You don't need that. At some point, you don't need the money. Do you think that they're going to give you more attention? Because everybody that's been published by mainstream that wasn't a big name, you know, they're not doing anything. They're not going to put any extra money or extra time. And no one I know reads a book and looks at the label. When I picked up Harry Potter, I can't even tell you who published Harry Potter. I can't. I don't know who publishes Daniel Black. I know that I'm getting the coming. I actually do know because I bought books for Healthy, Wealthy, Wise. So I do know. So I'm not going to lie. But before that, I didn't know I had to go find his publisher. We buy the people. We support the people. So all we need is the institution or the apparatus to get those things out. So I'm saying this publicly. When you finish grading your paper, so we have some work to do.
We do. In fact, I hear the echo, and I know we're wrapping up. I'm gonna get on the road in a few minutes, but I do want to mention this in freedom schools. Like you can imagine, when we at our peak, we had 21. Oh, good. Oh, yes. That's what I'm talking about.
Go ahead with that. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. At our peak, we had 21, and that was and then I didn't even talk about this, and I'll just mention it in passing. The first year, we chartered a plane, 140 high school students, took them to Clinton, Tennessee. The next year, 2000, when I picked the debt, we went to Cheney. No, we're going to stay in the dorms at Cheney. We're not giving University of Tennessee no money. We're going to have a Black campus. That's the first time we did libation to Octavius Catto. That's why it hits me in the heart so much when they brought me that Catto. Man, this is where we started freedom school. The next year, we went to Lincoln. And then the following year, we went to Shaw. Since SNCC started at Shaw, that's why we going to Shaw. Everybody from Bob Moses and Dave Dennis to Sonia Sanchez, we would have them come and talk with us. Randall Robinson twice. Then we started going for years to the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. If we're going to pay somebody, we're playing Black institutions. I'm bringing that up for a reason. At our peak, we had 21 freedom schools. So that means 210 college students, college age students, because they didn't have to be in college, but most of them were. Now you take that times 2, that's the high school students. That's 400. So you got 600. Then on top of that, you got all the other people, the project managers, the site coordinators, the student, to get the money from the school district. We had to make the case that they were getting high school credit. Service learning credit is what we eventually settled on. And that then meant that you had to have high school teachers check their work. We call those academic advisors, or I call them the faculty. So you got all those people. We would load up buses, 7 or 8 buses, go all the way to North Carolina or go to the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, set up camp for the most part of a week, do our intellectual work, introduce the book, have the author come if they were alive, back and forth. We had to order the books. This is where I'm going with this. And you appreciate this as a publisher, Prof. You get a call from Philadelphia Freedom Schools. We need 600 copies of W.E.B. Du Bois, The Education of Black People. What? Every time I go in a bookstore and see that book, I smile because the copy that I have is the original copy from 73, the black copy, cardboard copy, the spine will break if you keep it. I said, this is the book we're going to use. When we called Monthly Review Press in New York, not only did they not have enough copies, they even had that edition. They rushed it back into print to get enough, sent them to us, and now when I see it on the shelf, I just laugh. That ain't even the I take credit as Philadelphia Freedom Schools. We take credit for helping re-energize that. We will order children's books, and the authors and the publishers would call Philly like, who are y'all? I just got 400 orders for, and mind you now, 600 is the college students and the high school students. When you come on site, there are 100 students there. You got 2,100 sites. That's a couple thousand. If you divide it by the 3 areas that we have, even Debbie Way, brilliant curriculum writer, also works hard with Asian Americans United. She's part of the protest to keep the damn basketball stadium out of Chinatown. Individuals don't beat institutions. Oh, we didn't get a baseball stadium. Okay, let's wait 20 years and come back and put the basketball stadium there. And we'll have a black mayor that'll help us do it. This is how it works, y'all. But Debbie said, I need books in South Philly that are in Mandarin Chinese, English, and Spanish. Where you gonna find? She found the books. The publisher calls Philly like, I just got an order for 750. We ain't got no. You may children's books, just Philadelphia, because we were looking for the books that addressed our children. Brought children's books back into put some by authors, people who call us like, thank you. So the point you're making is very important. This isn't just a matter of intellectual stimulation. It isn't just a matter of memory. It's a dollars and cents commitment to build institutions. So please, Prof, what you're doing, what we're doing here, but I mean, your vision and connecting these things, that is a lesson that has to be underscored. This isn't just about the intellectual work. That's at the foundation, but you got to have institutions. If you don't,
well, you set the table. So many of us worked in our own silos. At least I did, because I just didn't feel like there was anybody willing to work. People don't really work with me who have individual agendas. I'm always going to reach out, and I'm always baffled and shocked when folk don't, because it's almost like if they don't build it, then it can't. So we have 50-11 things. Like, I look at Harlem sometimes, and there's a chicken store across the street from a chicken store. And I'm always like, why didn't y'all just collaborate? The chicken would be much cheaper. You can, codify your marketing, come together and build something that can be franchised, but somehow we have been imbued with this individualism at our detriment. And we're following a model that they don't even use, because they mess with each other. All of these big companies, like you say, you start pulling the thread, and you see that this company is actually funding this company, and they're all in bed with this company. And we're all sitting here thinking it should be just us.
That's
by
right.
ourselves. And, if we don't do anything in this space, we are modeling what it looks like when you work together. Because you came, Adjua brought you, then you brought Kenyatta, and you brought Mario, and then this one came. And as a result, now we have this community, and folk are stepping in and stepping up.
Yes.
And, even as I look at Urban View, as I was doing my best of, it was like Larry came on as a guest. I met Clay in the hallway at Sirius XM, and I was like,
wow.
Okay. Thank you, Bevy Smith, who was like, Karen Hunter, I got to introduce you to this guy. Bevy Smith is a connector as well. So you have to have that energy. And then I was like, well, do you want to come on? I met Godfrey in the hallway. I'm like, come on in. He got a show. Laura Coast was on the show. Like, there has to be, this way that, if there's goodness there, we have to be, if we have the platform to do it, be the purveyor of that. And now, I launched the Women's Empowerment Network.
Yes.
But that's a Trojan horse, y'all. Watch what comes next. I'm like, all right, yeah, I have a podcast, and it's good.
Hey, but y'all didn't know that. Y'all need to, this can be found wherever you get your podcast, right, Prof?
Correct. You just type in podcast. It's called Karen Hunter is Awesome. That too is very cheeky on purpose. Because, when we talk about the algorithms, even in YouTube, like, we have been so conditioned for people to tell us what to do, and we do it. They done gave us our heroes. They done gave us who's successful, who's the number one song person. I'm like, who voted?
Who voted?
It's like,
right. It's when Giovanni said, y'all gave a Pulitzer to Bob Dylan and not Stevie Wonder.
What
voted?
What is happening? So if we're going to set this thing, and it's not even setting the world correct, put it on it's reimagining. We have the ability, because we have an imagination to reimagine. I always say, what is the world you want to live in? What does it look like?
Yes.
Let's start imagining that now, and then acting.
Yes.
So I'm excited.
I am too.
As long as those drones don't drop stuff that
no question,
we can't come back from.
What can we do? We gonna do what we can do. That's what niggas you might say. I'm gonna do what I can do. You do what you. And it'll be enough. You know what? I'm glad you actually gave me a second too. As you were talking, I'm thinking about what you're saying. I want to mention my friends down at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, they have a new exhibit that opened yesterday. It's called In Slavery's Wake. Remember I told y'all a couple of weeks ago, this book, here it is, In Slavery's Wake, Making Black Freedom in the World. The exhibition opened. I wasn't at the opening. This is the placard here. In fact, I don't know if y'all can see that QR code. I guess that's the order form for the book. So, y'all can look that up. But here's what it says, right? It says, we are living in the wake, in the reverberations of colonialism and racial slavery, in the legacies of resistance and freedom making. We must understand our past to build freer futures. I couldn't agree more with this. But of course, when you start your history with slavery, everything since then looks like progress. So in today's New York Times, they did a review. It's called How the Slave Trades Shaped the World. Another another social structure review. This by Jennifer Slusher, who got a chance to walk through the exhibit. And typically, if they, on the occasion, they'll reach out to me or send me an email or text them. You want to come down early? And sometimes I'll go, but most of the times I don't. I just go the same time everybody else goes. So I haven't seen it yet. It opened yesterday. I'll get there in the next week or so. But I'm raising that finally for this reason. They took In Slavery's Wake. They took the title from a book called In the Wake, very interesting book by a sister who's written a lot about how enslavement and captivity has shaped everything that came after, and they integrate a lot in here about resistance and all of that stuff. Sadia Hartman is the sister's name in the Wake. Some of y'all know the book. And as I was reading the review, I wasn't getting mad. I was just laughing because I already know I've read the catalog. So now I'm going to go see the real thing, the actual thing. And it's going to be here. Then it's going to leave here. It's going to Brazil. It's going to Senegal. It's going to Cape Town, to the Ezekiel Museum. I've been there before several times. But the idea that the captivity is still the fulcrum is a problem. So I'm sitting there thinking, how can I use an Africana lens to apply this? It wouldn't be In Slavery's Wake. I got it. What about In Integration's Wake? That's how we should think about this. In Integration's Wake. That's what Africana Studies is designed to address. Why? Because there was a time when Nikki Giovanni grew up that you combated this kind of stuff from your Black institutional space. But once integration came, now you have Nikki Giovanni at Virginia Tech instead of Virginia State. Now you have, now you got, in other words, the Black institutions have been raided. And guess what your people are known for? Chasing balls, dancing, and fighting each other on reality TV. Shout out to Andy Cohen. The whole point is that the whole idea, you know what happened in slavery's wake? Slaves. You know what happened in integration's wake? A Blackness that is a figment of the white imagination. And guess what? Before integration, we knew enough to say, I can enjoy a song, I can see some ball players and enjoy that. But at the same time, I know that's not the center of our community. Now, in integration's wake, not only can't we tell the difference, we celebrate the exactly wrong thing. Now the white mind is in our heads.
It's even nastier. I remember being a 20-something person at the Daily News in the editorial board, or on the editorial board, 31, and being required to speak for Black people with no foundation. I had some foundation, raised in a hunter household, but I didn't have your foundation. I didn't have your knowledge. And yet what I said was gospel in that room because I was the only one that had the gumption to even speak. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's better than most. I think back, even at the times, and it's hard to criticize somebody because you're the only thing that's going to be, for Nicole, Hannah Nicole Jones to do that thing. Took something, right?
Well, I ain't mad at her. I'm saying, imagine if it had been somebody other than you at the Daily News. Imagine if they hadn't had your parents. If they hadn't, and they
there was. I'm not going to name check folk, but there was somebody who wasn't in the room fighting those things, and I'm saying I was still inadequate. Is what I'm saying.
I hear you. Well, all of us are inadequate by ourselves. That's why we got to have our connections.
Right.
Yeah. And I ain't mad. And Nicole's my friend. She's a colleague. I was just cracking up when Nikki Giovanni's like, I'm not changing. No. Okay, sweetheart. You will see that this is really what you want, but And then, until just give me my phone back. I'll put
But
it
on
in.
her side, she just wanted to have Nikki Giovanni in
Oh,
there.
oh, no
And
question.
she should, right? But
And
she
got
also
20
knew
bitches. No question.
that those folk don't, and so you compromise
Right.
to get something done.
Yes.
Even if you know it's not perfect, but in that compromise is where you lose all of, where you lose the fight. The fight is lost in the compromise, right?
Oh, look, that's another bar. The fight is lost in the compromise. Let me write that down. Karen Hunter, the fight is lost in seriously. That's right. That's right. Some fights you don't need to fight, but yeah. And
for
she
us in politics, yes, you have to compromise.
Right.
For
Sure.
our humanity, there should be no compromise.
No.
Right?
No. That's right. That's right. I love it.
I mean, we owe it to not just our ancestors, but to the people that are going to come later to not compromise on those things. Because 100 years from now, I keep saying, they'll only know what we put in the ground right now.
Right.
So we're gonna put some compromise seeds in the ground, and they're gonna have half a piece of fruit when it comes to fruition, and we won't be here to tell them that this was the story arc of how it got there and why you're not really nourished. We can't keep doing this.
That's the metaphor. She said, I called it 1619 Jamestown. She said, yeah, but the number is not in the That thing that was pressed into that child's hand by her grandmother, that peanut that you're claiming now is from Virginia, that's the whole point. Her memory came with her. And that blows that 1619 framework out the water. Who are we to each other? And you're right. There it is right there. What we will remember is what we won't be here, but the plant come. We did not grow in the ground of this enterprise. We came from somewhere else. We were able to persist. And for Nikki Giovanni, as much as she wrote about Africa and the African world and Black, it's her grandparents. It's her, and that's not a story of America. It's a story of an American experience. But like Duke Ellington said, when they asked him, how do you define your music? He said, I don't have a definition, but if I had to describe it, I suppose it would be music with an African foundation interpreting this American experience. Oh, we can't do nothing with that. Is it jazz? Is it? No, I'm not taking your label. I'm not taking you call it what you want, but
your label is meant to keep me in a position of subservience and always be beneath you, even as we talk about books.
Yes.
There's a story that said, publishers aren't going to be publishing Black books. And I was like, good.
More for us.
Yay.
Then we can recover. Right?
Yes, keep your filthy hands and minds off of our stuff. Yes, good. Let's raise up the next Toni Morrison, who could sit in the soil for 20 years before publishing her first book and give us a Angela Davis and a Muhammad Ali and a Black book that sat in my house and all of the things in a white institution, but with Black ideology. Like if you're going to be there, but there are no Toni Morrisons. As somebody that is right now currently in the throes of finishing up a book for one of these publishing houses, I was like, where are the Toni Morrisons? Where are the Toni Morrisons?
Yeah. Oh, and who brought her? Charles Harris was the brother's name. Charles Harris was the editor at Random House, the Black man who was there. She worked with Charles Harris. He made transition in 2015. I got a chance to talk with him one time. And just, he a giant. So yeah, that's and again, when I see you, you see me, and we see each other, and we all see each other, we're products of institutions. And so yeah, I'm not gonna spend whiteness wants everything from us. And I refuse. And you refuse. We refuse. No. We interact, we're human in the world, but and Nikki Giovanni, if nothing else, now senior people are being critical and say, well, she had a white partner, and James Baldwin has so many white partners. And so how do you listen? Everybody live their life, work out their truth, deal with what they're dealing with. At the end of the day, the work is there. And it wasn't white institutions that produced Nikki Giovanni, from her family to the places she grew and rose. And if she had been at Fisk teaching, maybe she got a 4-4 teaching load. Maybe she can't do, you know what I'm saying? Right. It was important for Mike Vick, for Nikki Giovanni to be at Virginia Tech, because they wanted him to come there and throw a damn ball. Next thing you know, he's sitting in the room like, oh shit. And he said, that made all the difference for me. And in fact, you remember what he said? He said, only thing I regret is I wish I'd have been a better student.
Yep.
But guess what? Brilliant athlete, but who that man is coming out now in the documentary. That y'all was looking at me for throwing the ball, and now I'm a punchline on stand-up comments about dogs and fighting. I'm not gonna, you're not gonna do that to me. You know what I'm saying? Anyway,
reclaim my time.
I'm
All
gonna
right, I
reclaim
love
my
you.
time. Love you.
I
Yes,
love you. Next week or the
yes,
week after. So, okay. All right. Have a wonderful. Tell everyone in Philly I said hey.
yes,
And
ma'am. I will.
and Madness on Netflix with Coleman Domingo
Oh,
set
how
in
is it?
Philly. It's so much better than I thought. I was like, not gonna watch it. And then I'm all in it, but it's the Philly. I know they didn't film in Philly, but there's such a Philly
Oh, in that case.
foundation there. There's like it's like Abbott in many ways. Like
Oh, really?
but it's not funny. No, it's like drama and trauma and all of this, but it's got that Philly neighborhood.
Okay.
I like it. I like it a lot. I gotta finish it
I'm
up.
gonna have to watch it. Are you been? Yeah, I started watching a little bit of Cross, because that's supposed to be set in DC, but the DC people got mixed opinions on.
Yeah.
I like all of
So I want to
it.
know because I'm not a Philly person. So
Yeah,
I've been there every time.
I'll ask the Philly heads tonight. I say, Professor Hunter is watching this series with Coleman Domingo. What y'all think? I'll report back Monday night. Love y'all.
All right, love you too.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Oh, me.
It's Soul, and this is your announcer, Joe Dennis. And tonight on Soul, a conversation between James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni. And now, here to introduce the program is the producer of Soul, Ellis Hazel.
Good evening. I'm Ellis Hayslip, and I welcome you to another Soul episode. One of the miracles of this universe that we deal with is the way it can use something as cold and gray and as impersonal as an electron. These electrons that fill your television screen to bring you an experience as warm and as rich and as human as the program you're about to see. And we here at Soul are extremely proud that we have been able to put together two programs, conversations between two brilliant and eloquent members of the Black family, Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin. We had to travel to London in order to tape these programs, and we then edited them to fit within our time schedule of 1 hour. Tonight, you will be seeing the first hour of this conversation, and next week, we will air the second part. Mr. Baldwin, who is now living abroad, is the author of Going to Meet the Man, Tell Me How Long the Train's Been Gone, The Fire Next Time, Another Country, Nobody Knows My Name, Giovanni's Room, Notes of a Native Son, Go Tell It on the Mountain, and A Rap on Race with Margaret Mead. James Baldwin is also the author of the plays Blues for Mr. Charlie and The Amen Corner. Nikki, as most of our viewers know, is an old friend of Soul's and one of quite a few beautiful people who has always made her time, energy, and thinking available to us. She is the author of Black Feeling, Black Talk, Black Judgment, Recreation, Gemini, and Spin a Soft Black Song. She also edited an anthology of Black female voices titled Night Comes Softly. So here now are Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin in conversation.
Jimmy, I'm really curious. Why did you move to Europe?
Well, why or when?
Why? I think I know when.
I moved to Europe insofar as one can say I did. I moved to Europe first in 1948 because I was trying to become a writer and couldn't find in my surroundings, in my country, a certain stamina, a certain corroboration that I needed. For example, no one ever told me that Alexander Dumas was a mulatto, and no one had told me that Pushkin was Black. And as far as I knew when I was very, very young, there had never been anything, as far as my father knew, which is much more important, there had never been anything called a Black writer. You know.
There still isn't.
So when I was 24, I split. I came to Paris and worked, and went home in 57 and worked and stayed and was based in New York, really, in and out, because work is on the one hand making speeches, on the other hand trying to write, you know. And I never was able to write in New York. So I would go out and do my work and come back and do my work, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I understand.
And that all ended in a way, or something else began after Martin Luther King was murdered. And I spent a long time in limbo. And at the moment I'm based in the south of France, but there wasn't any way ever to leave America. You know, I would be a fool to think that there was someplace I could go where I wouldn't carry myself with me, or there was some way for me to live if I pretended I didn't have the responsibilities which in fact I do have. So I'm, in a way, just living. I'm a cat trying to make it in the world, because I'm condemned to live in the world.
Condemned?
condemned in the sense that when you're young and also when you're old, you would rather, have around you, the expected things, to know where everything is, and it's a little difficult, but it's very valuable to be forced to move one place to another and deal with another set of situations all of the time, and to accept that this is going to be, it is your life, and to use it, It means you, in a sense, become neither white nor black, and you learn a great deal about, you're forced to learn a great deal about the history out of which all these words and conceptions and flags and martyrdoms
Right.
come.
Yeah. There's something that eventually I'm sure we're going to hit. So we're just going to have to work it out.
All right.
Okay, but let's say, with Everybody's Protest novel, which I think came out in 48.
It came out in 49, something like that,
Yeah.
yes.
And I was 6.
Oh, Jesus.
I thought it was a magnificent piece. I went to first grade. I said, my God, somebody's really talking. How do you stand in relationship, say, to that novel now?
To that, to Everybody's Protest novel,
yes.
that essay now.
Yeah.
Well,
what do you think about, let's say, the younger writers, of which I am one? And within that context, are we, in your opinion, like moving ahead? Are we moving out of that basic set of assumptions?
I think it's very difficult for me to say it. It can be misunderstood. But you have no idea, and I can never express to you to what extent I depend on you, or I mean you, Nikki Giovanni, and also your generation.
My generation, yeah.
I can even say you have no idea, and I can never express that either, because in a way I have no right to say it, but I'm very proud of you. Something has moved, things move in a very strange way, and maybe inexpressible. Mm-hmm. If I wrote that essay today, for example, I would be writing a very different essay out of a very different kind of problem. Mm-hmm. I think that without quite realizing it, and no matter what our hang-ups are as of this very moment, the hang-up of my generation or the hang-up of your generation, mm-hmm. And the terrible situation in which all of us find ourselves, one thing has changed, and that is the attitude that Black people have toward themselves. Now, within that change, I don't want to be romantic about it, a great deal of confusion and incoherence, will go on for a very long time, but that was inevitable. Mm-hmm. That moment had to come too, and Everybody's Protest novel, I was trying for myself, after all, first of all, to elucidate for myself a theology and the effects of a theology, which I, at that moment, realized I carried in myself. Mm-hmm. It was not the world that was my oppressor only. Because what the world does to you, if the world does it to you long enough and effectively enough, you begin to do it to yourself. Mm-hmm. You become a collaborator, an accomplice of your own murderers, mm-hmm. because you believe the same things they do. They think it's important to be white, and you think it's important to be white. Mm-hmm. They think it is shameful to be Black, and you think it is shameful to be Black. And you have no corroboration around you of any other sense of life. All those corroborations which are around you are, in terms of the white majority standards, so deplorable, they frighten you to death. You don't eat watermelon. You get so rigid you can't dance. You can hardly move by the time you're 14. Mm-hmm. You're always scrubbed and shining. A parody of God knows what, because no white person's ever been, as clean as you have been forced to become.
Yeah, that's true.
And you got somehow to begin to break out of all of that and try to become yourself. You know, it's hard for anybody, but it's very hard if you're born black in a white society. Hard because you've got to divorce yourself from the standards of that society. The danger of...
The only thing on the road faster than a race car are rising car repair costs. But with Endurance, you'll never pay for covered car repairs again.
Just 2 claims saved us over $1,700.
If I didn't have Endurance, I would have paid over $7,000 out of pocket to repair my vehicle.
So make the call. Find out how much you could save with Endurance.
Call right now to get $300 off any plan. Call 1-833-440-3916 now.
What is your name?
Amy Larson.
What is your occupation?
Physician in internal medicine.
You have children?
Yes.
How old are they?
9 and 7. Babe, what's wrong?
We're not together anymore. We got divorced.
What?
She can't remember the last 8 years.
She looks at me like she used to before everything happened.
I don't know who I am now, but I wanted to be a doctor my whole life. I won't give that up.
Doc, series premiere, January 7th on Fox.
Your generation, if I may say so, we will pursue this length if you like.
Go on.
Is to substitute one romanticism for another. Because in fact, these categories are, to put it too simply, but with a certain brutal truth, these categories are commercial categories.
It's true.
There was a reason that when you and I were slaves, my son produced out of your body was by definition a slave. But the master's son also produced out of your body, depending on his color. If he was light enough, he could live in the big house. And if he wasn't, he took his condition from the condition of his mother.
He was still a slave.
He was a slave. He was a slave. He was a slave because even though he might be the master's son, the master could make money off of his son. The whole institution was threatened if a slave woman could produce a free man.
Of course.
And the dilemma begins there. Do you see what I mean?
I don't see why it's the dilemma. If a slave woman could produce a free man,
a slave woman was forbidden
that means anything.
A slave woman was forbidden by law. I said the reasons are commercial, to produce a free man, because once you have a free man out of the body of a slave, you no longer have a slave.
That's true.
But it's very hard to recognize that the standards which have almost killed you are really mercantile standards. They're based on cotton, they're based on oil, they're based on peanuts, they're based on profits.
Yeah, to this day.
To this hour.
Yeah.
Which the church sanctifies.
But the church is commercial.
It's when you begin to realize all of that, which is not easy, that you begin to break out of the culture which has produced you and discover the culture which really produced you. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
What really brought you where you are. When you're in trouble, when I'm in trouble, I do not sing a Doris Day at Tin Pan Alley tune. You find yourself, humming and moaning, something which
but that has nothing to do with
great-grandfathers did. No.
That has to do with us.
No, that has to do with us.
Yeah.
And what it's all about is the attempt now to excavate something which has been buried. Which you contain and I contain, and which your kid contains. And which has got to carry, which one has to hand down the line for the sake of your kid and for the sake of future generations, and even for the sake of white people who have not the remotest idea what this means. Because we have the edge over the people who think of themselves as white, and that we have never been deluded into believing what they believe. And that sounds like a contradiction.
Yeah.
But in fact, you watch man you work for. You have to watch him. You don't know you're watching him.
You're watching him.
But you're watching him. But he's not watching you. He thinks he knows who you are or what you are. You don't know who he is because your life is in his hands. And you have to watch him, because if you don't watch him, you might have lived from Monday till Tuesday. It's as simple as that. And without knowing you know him. He can't fool you.
I'm not at all. I mean, the civil rights movement, I came up in the 60s which is like way after everybody else. But we always assumed that we knew white people, you know what I mean, that we really sort of like understood them. And I found out that if you don't understand yourself, you don't understand anybody else. And all you know what I mean with the snake is to watch a snake. And you know it's a snake, but you don't know it.
That's right. That's right.
You know what I mean?
That's right.
Because there's too much between, there's too much emotion.
There's too much
fear.
I mean?
I can watch like the cat I work for, you know what I mean? And he's going to watch me to some extent. But we know each other. I would hypothesize that he knows me better because his game is running, mine's not. And that's what I've sort of always disagreed with your generation on. As long as his game is running, he obviously knows me because I'm playing. You understand? He said jump and I'm saying how high. Yeah. He knows me.
You may be right, but I would put it another way. I would suggest that since his game is running, he hasn't got to know you because his game is running. No, you're part of the game he's running. He hasn't got to know you. I would think that one of the reasons that the Americans are in such trouble now is because the game is running. It was running up until only yesterday, really.
Would you believe today?
You know, and all of a sudden, through the American astonishment, the Americans have suddenly discovered that people in the world don't like them.
Yeah.
Now, I always knew that, because I didn't like them. You know, I love some.
They're not likable. Well, there's two people that are
unlikable.
And there's two people in the world that's not likable, a master and a slave.
Exactly.
You see?
Exactly. You know, we will never get precise categories for that very loaded statement. You know, but that is where the truth is.
Yeah. How did you like them? So the question, I mean, for me, the question has always been power.
Yes.
And for like you all, the question has been morals. You know, I never wanted to be the most moral person in the world.
I agree. I
would sell my soul. You know what I mean? What does it profit a man to gain the world and lose his soul? The world. You know what I mean? The world, that's what it profits.
I know.
So you take the soul, you know, the thing that's spiritual. Take the world, but give me Jesus.
Yes,
y'all can have Jesus. Give me the world. You know, even though it's losing 25% of its energy every 100 years or something ridiculous.
Oh, please, don't believe don't believe everything you hear.
No, but I'm saying that's not my concern, you know?
I know.
Even though it's polluted, ugly, dirty, give it to me. Or I will take it or not.
But speaking, I agree with you. I agree with you. But speaking for myself, but also speaking as representative of my generation. But it's probably safer to speak only for myself, really. You know, I know that in my own case, what I felt and still feel, perhaps in a different way, but what I felt very strongly in the years, for example, when we all were marching down those dusty highways with Martin. Look, I left the church when I was 17 years old. You know, and I've not really been to a church since, except, you know, when I had to go for various fundraising rallies or this or that. And I was not exactly the kind of Christian that Martin was, if I could be described as Christian at all.
It's hard to be the kind of Christian he was.
But I liked him. I loved him, in fact. And I knew that something was happening through him. And my concern was, yes, the world. But I'd seen what white people had done to the world. And I'd seen what white people had done to their children. You know, because in gaining the world, they had lost something.
A lot.
No, they'd lost the ability to love their own children.
Or the ability to love themselves.
Which is the same thing, you know. And I didn't want that to happen, if I may say so, to you. It was not a matter of morals so much as a matter of being forced, in my own case, to keep suggesting that though it was indeed, you know, a matter of power without, the word morals is misleading. Power without some sense of oneself is simply another kind of sterility. And that black people would then become exactly what white people have become. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a danger.
You know, I also accept this, that danger is not up to me to tell anybody how to run. You know, I can only speak as what I am. I'm a kind of poet. And if I'm a kind of poet, then I'm responsible from my own point of view to the people who produced me and the people who will come after me. You know, so that when the Holocaust comes, and it will come, you know, eventually, no matter how simple black and white terms maybe today, life is not that simple. And sooner or later, if I do my work as I should do it, when I'm needed, I'll be there. You know what I mean?
And the people listening, I know what you mean. Because I think the most important thing for any of us is when what comes, or when what we know will come comes, that we have the strength to say, yeah, it can.
That's right, it can.
It can. And I'm going to stay in my apartment on 94th and you'll be in Nice. But we'll say, yeah.
And we'll also be able to ride out the storm. But what is more important is not so much riding out the storm for you, Nikki, and me, Jimmy. But in my mind's eye, there's always that kid. He's going to be here when you're gone.
Oh, yeah.
Hopefully. And when I'm long gone. And from my point of view, it is about the children. It is about the children. We have to give the children something, which in a way was after all given to us, though we had to learn how to translate it. Because your kid will be moving in a very different world than the one in which I grew up, which you won't know anything about at all, or the world in which you grew up, which will be remote for him. And yet he comes out of it and has got to carry it much further than you or I will be able to carry it.
He's got to have respect for it, but not be trapped by it.
Precisely. You have to give it to him and liberate him from it. Yes.
And I think that kind of thing has been lacking. Like, I think one of the nicest things that we created almost as a generation, and it wasn't us because Martin Delaney and those people were way before us, but just the fact that we could say, hey, I don't like white people.
It's a great liberation.
It was a beginning of course, being able to like them.
Exactly.
Exactly. Which of course it upsets them, but that's their problem.
Yeah, but their problem really is a kind of, we were talking earlier before the show began about the kind of incomprehension on somebody's face. You're trying to describe what is to you a very simple situation.
Right.
Like people don't like going to jail. And you see the man's face and he looks astonished. What? People don't like going to jail? And then you pull back.
Does
that really go on? And you live with this all your life. And what you watch is that he knows it really. He doesn't think that you know it. He doesn't think anybody will tell him. And if it comes in, as we were saying earlier, if he allows that to enter into his guts, he's a very different person. He may explode. He doesn't know what will happen if he allows this apprehension of someone else's experience to enter into him.
Right. Because he's perpetuating his experience.
And this is the crisis of the age. This is what Malcolm really meant when he said that white is a state of mind.
Okay. I won't argue that. On a certain level, because I tend to be parochial, one thing, and I tend to care about Afro-Americans, which I would define as the sons and daughters of slaves and slave owners. You know what I mean? I have.
That doesn't, by the way, sound very parochial to me.
It's very parochial because I don't care about my third world brothers and sisters and things like that I'm sure I should. But as we...
You mean you're responsible for a certain situation?
I just can't deal with it.
Yes,
I think that if everybody dealt with their own little situation, if I deal with my block and you deal with your block, we'll have two good...
And Malcolm said that too.
Yeah. So when we deal with white as being like a state of... Well, Malcolm said everything, which I would grant.
Really?
He encompassed. But as we begin to try to deal, with the world, we find that a lot of things break down. And we find that frequently a white face goes with a white mind. Occasionally, a black face goes with a white mind. Very seldom, a white face will have a black mind. But we find the frequent situation is a white face has a white mind.
Yeah, but
you know what I mean? So for the few mistakes that you would make, it's unfortunate.
No, I know.
I wouldn't. To me, it's unfortunate.
I wouldn't argue that at all.
Yeah.
I wouldn't argue that at all. It doesn't make any difference to me. As I said once somewhere, that a cop is a cop.
Well, cops are white.
And and he may be a very nice man, but I haven't got the time to figure that out. All I know is he's got a uniform and a gun. And I have to relate to him that way. That's the only way to relate to him at all. Because one of us is one of us may have to die.
One of us, in New York, there's a big campaign going on to humanize the policemen, and they have billboards upstate, and they have a picture of a big cop bending over this little blonde girl. And the sign say, and some people call him Pig. And I wanted to buy a billboard. I told a friend of mine, I want to buy a billboard and show this big cop and this 14-year-old kid with 30 bullets in him and saying some people call him Peacemaker. You know,
You ought to do one thing. One thing Lorraine Hansberry said, get this photograph. When we had that famous meeting with Bobby Kennedy, Lorraine said to Bobby, who was also dead.
Everybody's dead.
You know, Lorraine said to Bobby, in answer to something about black manhood. Jerome Smith had been talking about black men. And Lorraine said she wasn't worried about black men because they'd done very well, all things considered. She was very proud of them. But she told Bobby, she said, I'm very upset about the state of that civilization which produced that photograph of that white cop in Birmingham standing on that black woman's neck.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. What does that say for white manhood? But again, that's a moral position.
Well,
you follow what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
That means that we're on top of the situation by being on bottom. And many of us would like to see it the other way around.
I'm not quite that romantic, or even if you want to use the word moral, quite that moral. I simply know, I think I know. You know, look, I'm not a financier. You know, I'm not a banker. I'm not a practical man, so to speak. You know, and what I am. And I know the choices I've had to make in my own life to be able to shave in the morning, to look myself in the face in the morning. Now, I'm not so moral as to sit here and say that if somebody had a gun pointed at my brother's head, that I would pray for him. You know, I'm not about to tell you, you know, that I'm lighting candles every day and every night for the soul of J. Edgar Hoover. You know,
yeah.
On one level, I'm not moral at all. I don't care what happens to Hoover and all his tribe. At all. But I do care what happens to you.
Think Miami can make a deep run this year?
Well, they have Tariq Hill, and
my sources say yes, and my sources are wrong as often as dolphins sleep. Never.
Wow. Be a football know-it-all with NFL Plus Premium.
I'm an overpowered leaf blower. And if you don't have the right auto covers, this could really blow your budget.
You know, and if I am moral, which I don't really think I am, but no, it's a word you keep bringing up. The relationship, I know. But the relationship between morality and power is a very subtle one. You know, because power, ultimately, with no morality, is not any longer power. You cannot call Spain a powerful nation. You can't call Franco a powerful man. He's got a whole nation in jail, but that's not power.
No.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
You know,
his game isn't running.
Precisely. Now, when our game starts running, and after all, baby, we have survived the roughest game in the history of the world.
Yeah.
You know, we really have. No matter what we say against ourselves, you know, no matter what our limits and hang-ups are, you know, we have come through something, you know. And if we can get this far, we can get further. You know, and we got this far by means which no one understands, including you and me. We're only beginning to apprehend it, and you're a poet precisely because you are beginning to apprehend it and put it into a form, you know, which will be useful for your kid and his kid, you know, and for the world. Because we're not obliged to accept the world's definitions. Just because white people say they're white, we're not obliged to believe it. You know, just because the Pope says he's a Christian, we're not obliged to believe it.
It would be crazy if we did.
We have to make our own definitions and begin to rule the world that way. Because kids, white and black, cannot use what they have been given. You know,
and they're rejecting it.
They're rejecting it. Nobody wants to become the president of Pan Am. or the governor of California or Spiro Agnew. The kids want to live.
Yeah.
You know, and we have, out of a terrifying suffering, a certain sense of life which everybody needs. You know, and that's morality for me. You know, you use the word morals, I would use the word energy.
Okay.
You see what I mean?
I can follow that, yeah.
You know, anyway, it's a very mysterious endeavor, isn't it? You know, because the key is love.
I was gonna say, it's hard to figure out Black people. And that's, no, really, I mean, you know, because
I know.
It's very hard because you say, let's say somebody like you, you've been out of the church for a long time, okay? I grew up, of course, in a Baptist church, and I really dig the church.
I do too.
I think it's a very cool.
I do too.
I can't dig the theology, but the music and the energies of the church.
Yes.
But then I went to the New York Community Choir had its anniversary recently, its first anniversary, and I went up to an AME Zion church, as a matter of fact, and the lady was singing. Some lady was singing, "Yes, Jesus loves me," and people started shouting. You remember Yes, Jesus?
Yeah.
People were shouting. And it hit me as I was sitting there, my God, as a so-called Black militant, I have nothing stronger to offer than Jesus.
Yeah, but you see, but you, baby.
And that was it blew, as a matter of fact, I church and said, ain't that a bitch? I was testifying, ain't that? It blew my mind.
Baby, what we did with Jesus was not supposed to happen. You know, at all.
Believe that,
no.
Yeah.
We took that cat over and made him ours. There's nothing whatever to do with the white Jesus in Montgomery, Alabama, in that white church. We did something else with him. We made him ours. Something in us knew he was always really a nigger, because Swedes don't come from Israel. You had to be fairly dark.
Well, white people really deal more with God, and Black people more with Jesus.
No, they don't even deal with God. They don't deal with God. They deal with God. For them seems to be some metaphor for purity and for safety. The whole heart of the Christian legend has always been, in some sense, impressing as being, really obscene. And it's the key to all the dirty jokes which come afterwards. Can you imagine what would happen to you, Nikki? I'm married to you. I go out to work. I come home. And you say to me, baby, you know what happened today? I said, no, what happened? Well, the Holy Ghost came by. Oh, he did he? And Joe, the Holy Ghost whispered in my ear, I'm pregnant. Now, I might.
I don't think you'd go for it.
I might look a little hard at you. If I were really vulnerable, I might try to find that cat, the holy who? The holy who?
The Holy Ghost.
This has been believed by millions of people
who
lived and died by it for 2,000 years. Mm. And when you attack it, you're accused of being blasphemous. I think the legend itself is a blasphemy.
Yeah.
What is wrong with a man and a woman sleeping together, making love to each other, and having a baby like everybody else?
It's true. It's not only.
Why has the Son of God got to be born immaculately? Aren't we all the sons of God? That's a blasphemy.
But we're not all the sons of God.
Well, it depends on what you mean by God.
Depends on who's doing it.
I've claimed him as my father. And I'll give him a great, great valor between now and the time, until it's over. Because God is our responsibility.
Well, I agree with that.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize, they think that we are God's responsibility.
No.
But it's one of him and 30 million of us.
That's right. And God's only hope is us.
It's true.
No. If we don't make it, he ain't going to make it either.
Yeah, now, people are funny about sex, which I never understood.
Well, they're terrified of it. Same way people are. It's not about sex either. It's not about sex. Sex is not really the problem. Love is the problem. When you're a kid, when you're a 16-year-old boy, 15-year-old boy, what does he want really? He wants release.
15-year-old girl.
Yes, and there's nothing yet at that moment yet to do really with love, because love is something which comes much later, really. A kid loves you in a certain way because he needs you. Mm-hmm. But later on, when you're a man or a woman, it has to be much more reciprocal. You love somebody because you need each other.
Right.
But one's not capable of this idea, when you're 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, when everything is sexual and everything is being discovered,
Mm-hmm.
That's why so many of our kids turn into junkies, which we won't go into at the moment.
Hey, but let's come back.
We'll come back to it, But the great question is not that. The great question is, you see, if it seems to me that the black male, situation of the black male is in microcosm, the situation of the Christian world. The price of being a black man in America. God bless you.
I'm sorry.
It's all right.
It's the weather.
The price you had to pay, the price you're expected to pay, and which you have to outwit, is your sex. No, a black man is forbidden by definition, since he's black, to assume the roles, the burdens, the duties, and the joys of being a man. In the same way that my child produced in your body did not belong to me, but to the master. He could be sold at any moment.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
I can follow that.
And this erodes a man's sexuality. When you erode a man's sexuality, you destroy his possibility to love anybody. Though sex and love are not the same thing, if the man's sexuality is gone, then his possibility, his hope of loving is also gone.
He has no way to express. He has limited ways to express.
He has absolutely no floor on which to dance, no room in which to move, no way to get from one day to the next. Because to make love to you is not the same thing as taking you,
Mm-hmm.
And it's a journey which most people have got to make with each other.
But why did black men, why do we allow this to happen?
Look, when I begin to talk about the situation of black men, I'm nearly 50, so that I got to avoid sounding, in any way defensive, because no, I don't mean that I think that you're attacking me, but you asked me a question which I'm trying to answer as honestly as I can. I have to look back over my own life, and you save yourself if you have any sense at all, and if you're lucky enough. If you lose your center, and let's say the center is your sex, if you lose that, if you allow that to be destroyed, then everything else is gone. And you have to figure out a way of saving it from the landlord. Because after all, I had to watch my father and what my father had to endure to raise 9 children on $27.50 a week when he was working. Now, when I was a kid, I didn't know what the man was going through at all. I didn't know why he was always in a rage. I didn't know why he was impossible to live with. But I had not had to go through yet his working day.
Mm-hmm.
And he couldn't quit his job because he had the kids to feed. He couldn't say, as our kids can, I don't like white people. He couldn't say anything. He lived his whole life in silence, except in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And he couldn't explain. How can you explain to a 5-year-old kid, my boss, called me a nigger and I quit. And the kid's belly's empty and you see it. And you got to raise the kid. You got to raise the kid. And your manhood is being slowly destroyed hour by hour, day by day. Your woman's watching it. You're watching her watch it. And the love that you have for each other is being to be destroyed hour by hour and day by day. It's not her fault. It's not your fault. But there it goes because the pressures under which you live are inhuman. My father finally went mad. And I understood when I became a man how that could happen. It wasn't that he didn't love us. He loved us. It wasn't that he didn't love his wife, our mother. He loved her. But he couldn't take it. Day after day and hour after hour, being treated like a nigger on that job and in those streets and on those subways. And then coming home to his children who didn't understand him at all, who were moving further and further away from him because they were afraid of him. And also, which is even worse, afraid of the situation, the condition, which he represented. He was, after all, for a kid, you begin to see when you're called a nigger, you look at your father because you think your father can rule the world. Every kid thinks that, you know, and your father cannot do anything about it. And then you begin to despise your father and you realize, oh, that's what a nigger is. And it's not your father's fault. And it's not your fault. It's the fault of the power, people who hold the power, because they have deliberately trained your father to be a slave. And they deliberately calculated that if he is a slave, you will be a slave. You will also accept it. And it'll go on forever, and slavery will last 1,000 years, which slaveholders said and believed. And now the bill is in. And they want from me or from you sympathy and understanding. I understand it all too well. And I have all the sympathy in the world for that spiritual disaster. But I have no pity. The bill is in. We paid it. Now it's your turn.
It's like a funny situation to be in, because like we were poor, but maybe unfortunately for somebody like me, not poor enough to relate to it. And that, you know, we had enough to eat it like that, things like that. So that my relationship to that whole syndrome, which remains true, I'm 28 to this day, is that I really don't understand it. I don't understand how one hand, you say you're talking about like a black man, that he can be nothing in the streets and so fearful in his home, that he can be brutalized by some white person somewhere and then come home and treat, you know, I mean, me, my mother, the same way that he was being treated, which perpetuates. I mean, you take somebody like me, I'm not married, right?
Yes, but Nikki,
I couldn't play my mother.
Yes, I know.
You know what I mean? I just couldn't deal with it. I said, no, this won't work.
But Nikki, it is also true that since your mother played that role, you haven't got to.
I couldn't.
But you haven't got to. That's the point. Because she did.
But her mother did.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Yes, but that's how we got here. What I really am trying to say is I don't want us to underestimate the price paid for us.
I have a great deal of respect for those people, for my parents, for people that I don't know, for the whole, you know, everybody who's shuffled. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it's a phenomenon to me how you could be mistreated and then come home and mistreat someone the same way.
First of all, Nikki, you say mistreated, or I say mistreated. No. But in the mind of the person who is doing it, he's not mistreating you.
No, I'm not dealing with that. Well, I'm not going to even, I mean, let's not for a minute. Let's say in the mind of, let's say your father, who is just an example, or the mind of my father, you know what I mean? He is being mistreated. I'm not going to deal with the cracker that's mistreating him. I'm going to deal with him. He knows that he is not being treated with the respect due him as a person, as a black man. Okay. In order to like get that together, when he comes into that house, he begins to like brutalize my mother, for example. You see what I mean? Which becomes like a phenomenon to me, because I don't like white people and I'm afraid of black men, right? If you can follow what I'm saying without anybody writing a letter and saying sister, you know what I mean?
But you can.
Okay, so what do you do?
Listen, you have to, I think
it's a cycle.
Of course it is, but you see, this is one of the reasons I don't protest, but try to make clear that the words white and black don't mean anything. You know, a man comes home. You know, he is in a situation which he cannot control. He is a human being. It's got to come out somewhere. A poor Puerto Rican several years ago, for example, it's alleged. But I can see if this happened, why it happened. Cat came home and the 3-month-old baby was screaming, and you know, as babies do. And he killed it. He didn't mean to kill it. He picked it up and threw it against the wall.
Yeah, I read about it.
He didn't mean to kill it. It wasn't that. I understand, you know, because I've been there. I know something about that. I don't know if it happens to a woman, but it happens to a man. You cannot do anything. They got you. They got you. They got you by the throat and by the balls. And of course it comes out. It comes out where would it come out? It comes out in the person closest to you.
I was going to say that's so wrong, because what you perpetuate.
Nikki, it may be wrong.
I hate to use those kind of terms.
But Nikki, it may be wrong. Of course it's wrong. But we're dealing with human beings. You know, one cannot be romantic about human nature. One cannot be romantic about one's own nature.
That's not fair. I don't think that I'm romantic, but
No, I don't mean that you are.
I have seen how the community, and even today in 1971, even today there are divisions based on those same kind of problems.
That's right.
So that the black men say, in order for me to be a man, you walk 10 paces behind me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well,
it means nothing. I can walk 10 paces behind a dog. It means nothing to me. But if that's what he needs, I'll never get far enough behind him for him to be a man. You know what I mean?
Look,
I'll never walk that slowly.
Look, Nikki, if at the risk of, it's a very great risk of seeming to pull rank.
No.
You know.
Pull rank. You know,
I'm not.
Come on.
I'm not. No, but I don't mean that. But
No.
what I do mean is that a great many things which seem, if I may say so, new to you are not new to me.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I can say then, okay, I see what the cat's doing. I know how long, I can tell you almost exactly how long he will do it. You know, I know that a great deal of what passes for black militancy right now is nothing but a fashion. You know,
At best.
You know, at best. Something will rest, something will remain. What is important about it is not the details, not the given, you know, people, you know, or the given so-called leaders or any of that jazz, you know. What is important is the impulse out of which it has come, the ferment out of which it has come, which it reveals too. And what's valuable in it will remain, and the rest will go.
Yeah, but what's...
you know what I mean?
Yeah, but again, what's sort of sad to me is that the same syndrome that, say, our fathers set up, coming from many, you know what I mean? My father is your age. And the same syndromes that they set up, well, you know, he's a little bit older, 55. But the same...
A little bit older, 55. Thank you, baby.
Well, 7 years older. The same syndromes, which is being set up, is being perpetuated, is that once again, the black man is becoming the figure to slide away from. You know what I mean? That once again, the black man is the figure that you say, well, I can't handle that. And if you visit with the states, or, you know, you talk to people enough, you'll see that same syndrome, you know, the little guys that are standing around crossing their arms, and they're not lovable. They're not giving any love. They could give a damn about me. You know what I mean? And that's unfortunate, because I need love.
Yes, but sweetheart, what you're saying is very, very serious. I'm not in the least denying it, because you're perfectly right. But the only way we can get through it, I think, and it's demanding a great deal of you, but one's got no choice but to demand a great deal of you, is that you understand. Look, let us say I'm King Oliver.
All right.
Right? And I'm a pretty good musician.
A very good musician.
And somebody called, let us say, Bing Crosby.
Oh.
You know, who couldn't carry a tune from here to here, right?
White Christmas.
Right?
It's true.
Now I watch this little white boy become a millionaire. Become a millionaire. Many times over. I can't get a job. You know, and time goes on. You get older. You get more weary. And since you cannot get a job, your morale begins to be destroyed. And the body begins to fail you. Your death approaches. All because being a man, you've never been able to execute what a man ought to be able to do. And this is not for anything that you have done or not done by some arbitrary sentence. How in the world, if I can't get a job, if I can't even get my axe out of the pawn shop, if I can't even get money to get on the subway, how am I going to love anybody except in such an awful pain and rage that nobody could bear it? I'm not trying to defend it. I'm trying to make you see it. Yeah. You see what I mean?
I do, but because maybe I'm hopeful, or because I've structured my life in a way that I won't.
I don't, by the way, think that what I'm describing is any longer true for your generation. I don't mean that.
But I see the same, what I keep saying is that I see the same syndromes in the same guys that I have to deal with now.
Yes, but my dear, what you have to see is also, you got to, look, think about the kid. Think about the kid. You know, what you're going through is one thing, and I'm not trying to minimize it. I'm not trying to minimize.
It's not the worst thing in the world.
I'm not trying to. I don't even mean you personally.
Yeah, I know the generation. It's not.
Yes, I don't mean you, Nikki, exactly.
No, I hope that nobody. No. I'm not talking about me that much.
I know. But what I do mean is that simply assume for the moment. The kid is a useful metaphor because it carries you past one moment
into the next,
into another moment. Because no matter what happens to me or to you, one's responsibility is somewhere else. So it's a terrible Tuesday and a wretched Friday. But, you're still, the kid don't know that. And then you begin to see that what looked so awful on Wednesday or on Friday, or is so awful, is awful, but it's not eternal. You can get through it.
Hopefully.
And when you get through it, you can understand it.
Okay. We're not like in disagreement. What I'm trying to maybe get you to relate to is that, and I lay it on black men because I'm a black woman.
You have every right to.
I'm sure it's that arbitrary.
No, you have every right to.
But a guy, let's say a guy's going with girl.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're going with Maybelle. And Maybelle gets pregnant. All of a sudden, you can't speak to Maybelle because you don't have the money for a crib, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She doesn't need a crib. The baby's going to sleep someplace. If you can follow me for 2 seconds, wait. Baby's going to sleep someplace. The baby's going to eat something. But what she needs at that moment is a man. Mm-hmm. And in order, if the man functions as a man,
mm-hmm.
which is not necessarily a provider for all that stuff, because mm-hmm. everybody can understand why you can't buy something. You don't have a job. You didn't have a job when you always going to bed. Mm-hmm. Why are you going to get a job because she got pregnant? You understand? There's no job. But what she needs is a man to come by and say, hey, baby, you look good. And black men refuse to function like that because they say, I want to bring the crib when I come. Baby, you're never going to get the crib.
Baby.
Bring yourself.
Baby, I agree with you. I understand what you're saying. But let me tell you this. You may be absolutely right. And you are right from your point of view.
It's arbitrary.
But you have to understand my point of view.
I'm trying.
And in my point of view, well, if you were pregnant, I would act very differently. That's me. That's something else. But from the man's point of view, given the fact, as we said much earlier, that the standards of the civilization into which you were born are first outside of you. And by the time you get to be a man, they're inside of you. And this is not susceptible to any kind of judgment. It's a fact. If you're treated a certain way, you become a certain kind of person. If certain things describe you as being real, they're real for you, whether they're real or not. And in this civilization, a man who cannot support his wife and his child is not a man. And this is also for example, in the welfare rules.
Yeah.
The black man has always been treated as a slave, and of course he reacts that way, one way or another. And you can blame him on a human level if you like, but I think it's more interesting you have to understand it. The bag the cat is in.
But it's so
because how can I? I'm not being rational. And I may love you, especially if I love you. How in the world I can't come with nothing.
But it's not.
I know it doesn't.
Toyotathon is on. Now's the time to get an exciting new Toyota, like Camry.
Wait, what?
RAV4 Hybrid.
Cool.
Tundra, and more.
Wow.